Of Tuesday, April 9th, 2024 to order. Before that, I just want to thank the F&A committee for being back here again after such a long meeting earlier. So you're putting your time in today. So do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. So moved. Workshop discussion, major thoroughfares corridor plan. Sean, do I turn it off to you?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We're happy to present the major thoroughfares corridor plan, along with priority segments that you identified at your last workshop on this item last July. Brian McElwee is going to be the lead on our side to introduce the team, go through this plan with the consultant team, and share information with you all today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Brian McElwee, Director of Public Projects and Facilities. Thank you today for allowing us to present the latest progress on the major thoroughfares corridor plan. Obviously, Sean just introduced himself, but also up here, along with Town Manager Orlando, we have Jim Nowanicky. He is our Transportation Program Manager. And then from our consultants, as you know, we've been working with an expert team in the land planning and transportation field. We have Brian Kinzelman. He's a principal with MKSK. MKSK is a planning and urban design and landscape architecture firm based in Columbus, Ohio, with 12 different offices based in certain metropolitan areas. They are a leader in capturing the full value of streets for all users and uses. Additionally, we have Jonathan Guy, who's a vice president with Kimley Horn. Kimley Horn is a premier engineering, planning, and design consultant, nationally recognized industry leader, creating sustainable transportation plans for communities and regions. And finally, we have Addie Weber. She is a office director in the Atlanta office for Tool Design. Tool is a transportation company founded with a mission to support innovative streets and dynamic communities where people of all ages and abilities can walk, bike, and have access to transit. So together with them, staff has been working on this corridor plan. I think we had a presentation in July of last year. And so what we want to do today is present a high-level overview of the overall plan and then dive into two priority segments. William Hilton Parkway Segment 3, which is from Beach City Road to Dillon Road. And with that, we're also going to have Jim give an update on the interim safety improvements that we're working on in that area, in the Northridge area. And then the other priority segment is William Hilton Parkway 2, which is from Wilborn Road to Beach City Road. And it also includes Main Street. And so the goal today is to receive feedback from council so we can advance into final design for those two priority projects. And then also for you, we have the draft corridor plan. And then so over the next 2 or 3 months, since it is a big elephant, as you will, dive into this and give you all time to read it and review it. And then bring that to you probably in August, I would say, for adoption. And then we can bring the other priority segments in front of you in the future in a workshop setting like this. So with that.
Right, before you go forward, I want to ask the question, what's the purpose of this? Why are we going through this exercise? What is the whole driving for this? So not only that we know, but also the community knows as well.
Great segue. Got a slide, just pull it up here. So as you see here, it's to focus on analyzing and understanding our current conditions. You know, we have a lot of, segments within our corridors that might not be consistent, whether that's crosswalk patterns or wayfinding, signage, et cetera. Analyze what we have and then what we can do better to target the safety of roadways and the pedestrian and bicycle users that are out on our networks. And then you see direct improvements to critical areas along the corridors, and then create design standards. So giving us the playbook, if you will, to go out and institute some safety measures, consistency with our striping, signage, et cetera, across the island. So for all users, it's consistent, safe, and reliable.
As a town, have we ever gone through this exercise before?
Not to my knowledge, no. So with that, go ahead.
I want to jump in real quick too, because as I work with Brian and Sean and talk with you and the community, one of the takeaways here that is probably a little more invisible to town council and the community is establishing a position and working towards it with our South Carolina Department of Transportation, right? So our US Highway 278, Hope Avenue, all those streets, well, we know they're not ours. We have opinions on them. We have opinions on speed, on crosswalks, on signals, on landscaping, on treatment. And every time that we look at a new segment, example, just the landscape cleanup around Sea Pine Circle or the crosswalk at Palmetto Bay Road and Arrow at that intersection. All of that is through an encroachment permit to the Department of Transportation. And most times they ask us, what's the town's position? And so what we're trying to do is not bring them one piece at a time, but for the entire system, the entire network, to have a grand plan, a grand scheme, so that we can implement it over time. And I think that is the big purpose of the larger document from my vantage point as well.
And if I can add, one other critical piece is having a plan in place so that we can seek funding from our other agencies and partners. Without the plan, it's difficult to kind of convey what we're trying to accomplish. And so having this in place with some consistency, the expectations are there. When we request grant funding, there's some confidence to know what we're asking for and what we'll be getting with that money.
Before I hand it over to Brian, this is just kind of the overall project area that we're dealing with. You can see in purple is the William Hilton Parkway segments. We have that broken into 8 different segment areas. And then we have the South Island segments, which are Palmetto Bay and Arrow Road, Sea Pine Circle, Hope Avenue and Coligny Circle, and both South and North Forest Beach Drives. And then the other one in orange is the Cross Island Parkway corridor, which consists also of the Fraser Bridge and the approaches there. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian Kinzelman, and then he will hand it off as we go through these different segments.
Brian. Council, if I can get this to work. I always mess this up, don't I? We were here months ago to review with you the systems portion of that. That's the incremental elements that we see on these corridors, everything from bicycle and pedestrian environment to crosswalks, signage, landscape, everything that makes up that corridor. You all need to be applauded for taking on this exercise comprehensively and looking at what is essentially your standards moving forward. Every city, every town grows incrementally and organically over time, and it's very important to stop from time to time and reassess the inconsistencies, the changes in national standards and safety requirements, and then let that inform our engineering and our project development incrementally as we develop and improve these segments. To the segments themselves, those are those reaches of corridor that Brian just identified that we will apply these systems to, and then very importantly is the implementation schedule. What's our criteria for prioritization? It's got to be safety. Got to protect public health, safety, and welfare. It serves a number of issues. It satisfies you all as you work. It gives you another tool as you work through policy. It helps town management in terms of identifying implementation projects, engineering department having agreed to standards to work with, and also the consultant side of things and the contractor side of things as we physically lay pavement and create walkways and bike trails. So it is a comprehensive look. Again, it's a lot of information. You all are seeing a summary document in front of you, and we're going to hit the highlight reel here today, but it's a lot of technical information, and it's all needed to be addressed, quite frankly. I've got my 2 very capable colleagues with me as well to touch upon some of the technical aspects. The systems, again, we spoke to you before about those. It's about creating safe and robust trail and pathway system. We've been known through the years as having a world-class trail system in this town. There's still some missing pieces to that, interconnectedness and consistency and width. Again, we've got to prioritize the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. Automobile operators have got the luxury of having a vehicle about them, but those two other groups do not. Speed, looking at the speed issues and how that affects the geometry of intersections and turning motions. We've got some high-speed areas in this town, as you know. And bringing a sense of Hilton Head specific character to these corridors. That isn't a monoculture that every street needs to look identically, but this is a very unique place and it needs to have a unique signature to it from the signage and landscape standpoint. And I'm always amazed at how much traction, no pun intended, that we've gotten out of our transit system on this island in this town. And I think we should look to increase its usage and its comfort and its availability to workers and residents alike. And then on the landscape and the furnishing side of things, let's deal with Mother Nature. Let's not put in things that are not indigenous, not culturally correct. And let's make sure that when we place landscape, that it is not in the way of view corridors and pedestrian. So as on the landscape and aesthetic side of things, standardizing these materials, deal with our medians, more robust plantings to provide that separation, provide what we call island appropriate lighting at key places, intersections and crosswalks for pure public safety purposes, and increase that separation between automobile and pedestrian bicyclists to the extent possible. And think about the maintenance and the sustainability of this, certainly the engineering aspects of sustaining sight lines, but also the maintenance and operations of these systems. Let's not create more work from ourselves. Let's deal with Mother Nature. Signage and wayfinding, we've got great, I think, public art displays in this town. I think we've got more opportunities to do that over time, and I think that speaks to the brand of the town, and also consistency and improvements and additions of signage and wayfinding on the trails. Roadways, my friend.
Absolutely. So as we've been talking, some of the things that are important for us to think about is creating a uniform design language, especially for our roads. Your visitors, as well as local residents, you've got a unique driver population here. You've got folks who've been here for many, many years and folks who are just coming for the first time. Consistency in design language is going to be important as we're looking to enhance safety for the overall corridors. Your biggest public spaces that you have, excuse me, are your public roadways. And so creating a safe environment is going to be important for us. And so the first key thing, because as mentioned earlier, is that you don't own all of these roads. You have to do things through an encroachment process. SCDOT is important for that. So far, they've been very receptive to what we're going to present today. But creating those, setting important information such as your landscaping, your speeds, your widths, all of those things are going to be important. And then again, the incorporating signage and pavement markings as well. Access management is one of the easiest ways to improve the safety and overall functionality of a corridor. Not every parcel needs 5 driveways. We got into a place years and years ago where we just would open up any piece of property for a driveway. We found that interconnectivity and focusing those access points in key locations are making our roads much safer, and how we control those access points as well. And then, of course, balancing our vehicular efficiency and travel speeds. Speed is the number one fatality for road users out there, especially our most vulnerable roadway users, which Addie's going to talk about in a minute. It's important for us to have an efficient system, but not one that's unfettered with the control of a speed. And we want to make sure we set that correctly. That's why you see the speed limit to be determined. We don't see a monolithic speed limit along all the corridors. We see those adapting for the contextual areas that are there. And that's important for us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, of course, the number one way to improve safety as well is increasing enforcement relative to speed. So working with Beaufort County is going to be important for us as we look at that. A couple other things that are important as we talk about that standardized language is our intersection geometry. Just the segment we're going to talk about today has got some very interesting geometry out there. It's important for us to make sure that drivers understand what they need to do. And so when we have variations in that, that's when we create risk. We also create concern, and we create accidents because of that. Improving queuing areas, both along the pathways as well as intersections, is important. I can't stress this enough. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but improving our crossing standards, how we cross the street, where we intermingle with vehicular and pedestrian and bicycle traffic. You've got a wonderful trail system, but you do have to cross over roadways. So making sure those roadway users understand what's occurring there from both perspectives is going to be important. And then prioritization of our bicycle and pedestrian safety at intersections. Number one key point right there. Press.
Thank you. I think one couple key themes here throughout this presentation is legibility and consistency, really to help set those expectations, both from the vehicle driver, bus operator, bicycle, the ped. As a mom of 2 young kids, I understand, how we want to move through our systems, and our roads are really set up for moving cars. But we really want to think with our pathways of how not do we just provide safety, which Jonathan spoke about, which is that statistical number, but comfort feeling when you go through, move through the system. Make sure you're feeling comfort with your kids or whoever you're with in that moment. So some things we want to think about in this is filling those gaps, making sure those small little gaps are closed, because that will have a big impact on overall mobility. Again, increasing the amenities, and again, that goes to legibility and consistency of the amenities, where you can set expectations on where you're going to find certain things, and the materiality of those systems, as well as the wayfinding, and the consistency of design for our pathways as well. That goes a long way to also the transit. I like to think of transit as just, it should be part of the public realm and really, sure.
Pathways. Bicycle and pedestrians.
I think it's just continuing on what you're doing and just making sure that they are the priorities. So I think you're doing a great job.
All that we need to pay attention to, just in general. I think.
And then back to transit, it's again that public realm and making sure it's legible and integrated into the public realm. I think we think about our community and who are the users of the public realm, and it's not just cars, but about 30 to 40% of our community are people who can't drive or who are relying on bicycle, peds, transit. About how transit can be integrated into our system. I haven't looked at it recently, but that's in general.
So with all those incremental systems, this graphic shows a typical corridor understanding of what we're going to talk about next to the segments, and you'll find that there's nothing typical about our segments. Every reach of these roadway systems are different. However, in a graphic, you can see all of those elements being brought to bear with transit shelters, comfort stations, separation to trails and more robust trails, median planting, transit, and more, and I'll say appropriate landscaping, also some art opportunities. So it's with these summary of elements that we have looked into each of those segments as Brian had identified early on. You can see from this slide just some of these snapshots that there are a lot of inconsistencies. I'm here to say, though, that the town of Hilton Head Island has got a lot less inconsistencies than most communities. So it's not all that broken, but we need to address these things because it is a public safety issue. To my colleague's point, we also have various levels of bicyclists and pedestrians and automobile operators, and we need to remove as much confusion as we possibly can as we address each of these segments. So again, the parkway itself is broken down into 8 reaches or segments. They're based on the character of the place, not necessarily its speed limit, but how it feels, the land uses adjacent to it. Some are bigger than others in terms of length. The South Island segments, as we spoke of before, Palmetto Bay, Sea Pine Circle, Pope Avenue, Arrow Road, and then the connective tissue between Arrow and Palmetto Bay. Also, North and South Forest beaches for segments of those as we specifically address pedestrian crossings to the beach access. And then the Cross Island, we've broken that down into 2 segments. One, the bridge itself, and as we all observe, there's a fair amount of folks on bicycles and on foot right now doing a morning constitutional up and down that bridge, and also that segment of the parkway that is on terra firma. So continue to lead with safety. We've got to look at these high crash areas and minimize those through good design and good enforcement. Connectivity, there's still some missing teeth in our systems, and not every neighborhood right now has pedestrian and bicycle connection to destinations and to others. As Addie had suggested, we need to fill in those gaps and then create something that is unique to Hilton Head Island. There are certain signature streets and corridors, 2 of which we're going to talk about following this. There are others as well, but making sure that we approach these aesthetically and reinforce the character of the place. So one of those segments is William Hilton Parkway. Again, this was a priority as directed by you all, just based on the crash data and some of the unfortunate incidents that have happened there. This is preliminary engineering. What we've dealt with heretofore in terms of systems and segments is at a study level. Preliminary engineering is taking it to the next level of magnification, getting down to finer grained detail, not tens of feet, but feet and inches. It is the link between final engineering design, construction documentation, and getting things built in the ground. This is a necessary step to link the vision to physical construction. Safety, reducing conflict points. These are complete street principles. Everybody needs to be safe as they operate. And all modes of travel need to be addressed, not just along the corridors, but across the corridors. So this is this segment is largely a portion of the Mid-Island District, and through the district plan that was adopted by council a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we brought those principles forward. It was this segment of the parkway is meant to be a bit of a signature street. In fact, a signature street. It is the center of the island. It's got 3 significant high development areas and Mid-Island tract, soon to be a park. It's our busiest segment of town, one could argue, from a vehicle operation standpoint. It also has the highest incident of traffic accidents. So it is a segment of that, but it does not go around the horn that is in segment 4. So that is the piece from, as you can see from Dillon, moving to the left, which is to the west. A lot of intersections. We've got willy-nilly pedestrian crossings. We've got some marked crosswalks, but all of that needs to be addressed through these intersection plans.
Is this an area that involves a lot of collisions and injuries?
Yes, we've had some
Not the most, though, is it?
It's. I think it is. It's.
Hard to know.
It, And a lot of rear end collisions, people making turns. I've experienced someone crossing the parkway outside of a crosswalk. There is no crosswalk there. And had I not been paying attention, there might have been another accident. So it is critical. Some of the history of the corridor, just so everybody understands, today is a lot different than 1965, right? So we shouldn't beat ourselves up. These are issues that every municipality faces, and you all are keen on addressing them holistically.
To build on what Brian was saying, I think one of the important questions we need to ask is what is the role of this street? And I think also the history of the street. This street, when it was built, was designed to move cars through Hilton Head. Throughput was the key. As the island's developed, we have land uses that have come online, and now it's about throughput and access, and that is causing a lot of our conflict points throughout the corridor. So it's really to understand that history of how we are in this position today. And to your point, there have been a lot of pedestrian crashes, 15 fatalities and 53 major injury crashes within the last 5 years. So it's a significant issue. Segment 3 definitely highlights that issue of that conflict between throughput and access to our land uses and why we need to get it right.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you twice, but I'm sorry. I noticed that there were traffic counters out there maybe a couple weeks ago. So do we have data from the traffic count through there as a result of that?
We do. That information was used to help us understand the speeds through the corridor as well as continued volume, and then classification of vehicle types that are going through there. How many pedestrians, or how many personal vehicles, and then of course heavy units, buses, trucks, all of that information.
So you could do all that from those couple of cords that ran
Yeah.
across in two places. I understood speed, so I guess the speed limit is 45. Did you find an average speed through there?
We base it off of 85th percentile speeds, which is the point at which 85% of the population is traveling through there. That's kind of a measure that the FHWA has subscribed to us to follow. What we found was that there were speeds in excess of 65 miles per hour through there. But the consistent speed through there was closer to the 50 mile per hour range, right? And so what that tells us, though, is that you've got a posting of a speed limit, but you've got a road where most people feel comfortable driving much faster, a lot faster, and that's a problem. And so we got to find a way to change the design language that makes that speed appropriate through there for all users, not just motor vehicles.
So the comfort level for vehicles is lower. Yeah, I remember that comfortable thing, and I kept thinking, okay, well, how about pedestrians? Are they comfortable with somebody going 60 miles, 65 through there? No.
Absolutely.
I would ask if we could get that information so we can share it with the sheriff.
Thank you, Mayor.
John, question, if volume and speed are two significant variables, in that particular section, which is more important?
Well, my opinion would be having a speed limit that is set that still moves traffic through there, but accommodates not just a singular mode. We've got a lot of bicycles, got a lot of pedestrians. This is one of the highest crossing locations on the island. And so right now, they don't feel comfortable in the crosswalks, and they are playing Frogger going across the road.
If the volume were reduced by 30%, how much would that affect your design?
Double-edged sword, because what happens then is when the volume begins to go down, speeds continue to go up. And so you have to find a balance in between. The geometrics is really the answer. When we create a road that feels comfortable for all modes, then we've hit perfect spot.
Thank you.
Stole my line about a game of Frogger, because that is exactly what happens along this corridor is pedestrians not wanting to go walk to the dedicated crosswalk or feeling like they're taking their life into their hand when they're crossing without a signalized intersection. So that is really important to think about in our design and our thought process of that vehicle volumes and the game of Frogger that is happening with our pedestrians as they try to access the land use through there. It's not shocking to us that the most significant crashes along this corridor are side swipes and rear ends. I think a lot of that has to do with taking that right turn and to access a lot of the land uses. So you slow down, the car behind you hopefully is paying attention. They either hit you or they try to swerve and they sideswipe the car next to you. And that is the number of crashes. It's the bulk of the crashes we're seeing. And Jonathan saw 2 of them last time we were here as a group. He saw 2 of them within 8 hours, something. Yeah, there you go. So it is definitely a concern, and we want to think about that and the type of crashes. Again, how do we kind of tailor that with the speeds and the geometric solutions of the roadway? Again, providing the safety and the comfort for all modes, I think is going to be really important. Having watched and walked that corridor and watching all the movement of all the modes out there, so increasing mobility, but the safety and comfort and access to those all users. And as I spoke a little bit about that access of William Hilton Parkway really transitioning from a throughput, a street that just moves people, really about access to the land use. How do we begin to balance the land uses and the transportation, that it works in concert and we're not having a lot of these crashes that are happening along the corridor?
So staff and our consultants understand the importance of this section and addressing it as quickly as possible. We did a permit application to SCDOT to improve things on a short-term basis in November. We got feedback from SCDOT about additional information that they needed to approve those requests in December. We talked to Jonathan Guy and Kimberly Horn about creating that information that was needed. Yesterday, they delivered this packet of paper to us that we can submit to SCDOT. And Jonathan talked about some of that and answering some of the questions earlier in the meeting. And we will be setting up a meeting with Josh Johnson from SCDOT to talk about these recommendations that Kimberly Horn came up with to justify our request in November. That meeting will hopefully take place next week. Those requests included some pathway lighting, puck lighting in the pavement for the non-signalized intersections, RRFB, which is rapid flashing beacons, push buttons so that when there's a pedestrian that wants to cross these mid-block crossings, they can push the button. The rapid flashing beacons go on. The pavement puck lighting comes up so that people understand that there's somebody needing to cross there. We're going to improve the pedestrian crossing markings out there. We talked about a reduction in speed limit. The reduction recommendation is 35 miles an hour. And then do some kiosk improvements in that area. On top of that, Manager Orlando has been working with the county to get $600,000 worth of funding through IGA with traffic impact fees. My understanding is that the county is considering that this week, and we should hear shortly on that funding piece. Questions I can answer.
In connection with those suggestions and recommendations that you just referenced, one of the concerns is that pedestrians and cyclists and so forth were not crossing at crosswalks. They were doing it in the middle of the block. It sounds from what you're saying that these will be safety inducements, that if the riders and pedestrians know about them, they'll go to the intersections. But there may also continue to be people who don't go to intersections.
So one of the things
A
that
barbed wire fence or something?
one of the things that I forgot to mention was that we were going to do some median plantings, low-level median plantings to encourage people to not have to go through the jungle to get to the other side. And so, again, if those safety improvements are in place, more people will use them. And then again, we're going to help encourage them to get there by doing some median plantings to say, do I really want to go through all that, or do I just want to walk an extra couple hundred feet?
No, go ahead.
Jimmy, one of your points in here is speed limit reduction. You can take signs that say 45 miles an hour, have them move down to 40 or 35 miles an hour. I don't believe that's going to slow people down. What are the techniques or tools in this design that will operate to encourage a lower speed.
And these temporary solutions, we're not talking about changing the feel of the road. And Jonathan just talked about that, is that that feel really needs to change to affect those speed limits. So the best thing that we can do to encourage enforcement. And again, enforcement will change a lot of people's attitudes in how they drive. And again, I've been in many places in the country, and we can put signs up all we want, but it's enforcement that will make those signs work. And again, we just have to have good partners out there and encourage that partnership with our enforcement.
Thank you. Jim, these are interim improvements. When do they come to council for our vote?
I think that's why we're talking a little bit about those today, is so that you're aware of what's going on.
I gather Mr. Ames' question means, can we do?
We are preparing that so that we can do it.
I was going to ask the question, is there a consensus at this meeting that we should move forward so the mayor has the ability to put it on an agenda?
I would say yes, because all of this is about our support, moving it forward to get to the final document. If we need to pull something out of here to move it expeditiously, then we can definitely do that.
Okay, second, has the sheriff been advised of this recommendation to reduce speed? That was a stumbling block previously.
Correct. The first part of that, though, is that we've got to get SCDOT concurrence on this, because they control and set that. The sheriff's office is the enforcing arm of that, and we'll work with them once we get SCDOT to agree to this change. The data supports the change and the need for it. It's a matter of getting them, since they own the road, and then we'll go to the sheriff's office as a part of a larger plan with the Low Country Council of Governments for the SF4A project we're doing right now. We've had meetings with the sheriff's office, and this has been the number one topic with them. They're supportive of it. So I've already started to move that in the correct direction. Absolutely. And one other point, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to answer Mr. Glenn's question. The landscaping median will also help to slow traffic down. You create a visual barrier there that it doesn't feel as open, and that starts to narrow that focus down and creating that friction. So that's going to help, along with Jim's recommendation of enforcement. We will see.
Those sharp edged thorns on those bushes.
I'm not a landscape architect. I'll leave that up to my friends here to figure that out.
They're made of concrete. so it's
Before
not
we
a
get in
problem.
trouble, Patsy, go ahead.
Before we get in trouble. And you're turning to me to prevent us getting in trouble? Anyhow, while we're talking about that, landscape medians, even though you may want to discourage folks by low-level planting from not using them, they still will. And landscape medians provide a refuge for pedestrians. So let's not totally block them out there. I think that's probably the intent, but, it is a refuge for folks. With regard to the speed limit recommendation, is that only for this segment, or is it for the entire William Hilton Parkway?
We're talking about this segment in the report, and again, we'll have to get their concurrence on any sections that we're talking about.
And I know
We'll have
we,
to do a similar report to
For
try to
each
forward that
segment?
For each segment.
all right. Thank you for explaining the rapid flashing beacons. I wondered what an RFFB was. The other thing is that we're going to see pretty soon some other recommendations for this particular segment. And so Mr. Ames asked if this is the interim fix. So if this is the interim and it took from it, I appreciate all the diligence y'all have done in trying to get a CDOT permit process through. I know it's frustrating. But if we're going to approve these other changes to that segment, then taking this long to get these things approved, I'm concerned about the length of time to make those other kind of improvements. And I'm not going to ask you to try to forecast that. I'm just expressing concern about that. But I think this, as we understand it, this is interim. And then the other ones that we're getting ready to hear about are short-term fixes. A little bit longer to take than interim, but not long-term. Is that accurate?
Well, it's accurate if we have the funds to pay for them, right? So we have a sense of urgency, and I think that's the balance we're trying to figure out with town council today. One, I don't want to get over my skis with not bringing things to you, but we are at that tipping point. We know of the urgency that's here. We've heard from you, but we're in this proverbial chicken and egg and cart and horse situation. We can't just go to town council and ask you what you want if DOT won't agree with it. And we don't know what to tell you DOT will agree with or not until we go to them. And so hence we're coming to you first. We have had some real good preliminary work done with Jonathan and Brian and everybody. Thank you. But we're here today. I would love 7 head nods on the immediate fixes. We can figure out what the plantings look like, but we know this, that if it's going to be safer, it has to look and function differently than it did in the 70s. I think that's what we're really trying to say out loud today. But if we can get 7 head nods from you on this immediate, the other parts that we're about to dive in are much more expensive. Main Street, plus or minus $10 million. This segment, closing intersections where businesses currently exist. Like, the real policy lift is in the future slides, and that starts becoming, of course, heavier to lift and much more expensive to implement. So I would rather know what your position is and know that we have a sense of urgency instead of trying to figure out the shot clock on when we'll get it done. We don't have the funds for what you're about to see. We have the funds for what you're looking at right now.
Okay, that's helpful. I was trying to figure out, is this like step 1 of what we're approving today? And what does that mean with regard to the future? So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Comments? Light's green.
It's green because trying to give Mr. Orlando the green light.
Hey, there we go. There's 2
Everybody
votes.
push your microphone.
I just think we need to be very direct in nodding to this particular priority. Said already it's a priority. Now you said, here's how I'm going to do it. I think we need to be very deliberate in saying, hey, go do it.
Yeah, so I'll let council know that Mr. Orlando and I are planning to go up to meet with Justin Powell, the new Secretary of Transportation, in the next month or so we can talk about these projects that are going on the island so that they understand, so that they hear our voice. So just be aware of that. Okay?
Very good. Thank you for that robust discussion. Let me set the table here with understanding where we are operating today. And what you can see on the screen here is future capacity analysis without doing anything to the roadway at this point. And you can see there is some green up there, but there's also a lot of yellow and a lot of red. And what that tells us is that we're reaching that saturation point on side streets where we've got long delay. What happens when we have long delay? People start to make really bad decisions because they're frustrated. And that reduces their focus of other people who are moving in and about the intersection. So we use this as a baseline, and I'll explain this as we get through more of this. So let's talk about some of the tools and mechanisms we've got for the future year. And as Mr. Orlando said, we've already had some initial conversations on all that you're going to see here today, especially on William Hilton Parkway, and have received the nod of this works within our right-of-way from SCDOT. That doesn't give you the right to go build this today, but what it tells us is we've got a really good plan to move this forward. So our first goal, again, is to change that design language of speed. For so many years, this corridor has just been a thoroughfare just to get around to the beaches, right? We need to change that. The population has changed. There's more people here. How people move in this area are important, not only just from a motor vehicle standpoint. And you can see that what happens when we increase that speed, that overall stopping site distance we need increases by a tremendous amount. Just that change right there is over 100 feet. And you also see the survivability when that does happen. So we're stressing the point of that as we get into this. And another way to do this, and I mentioned this earlier, is changing how we look at the geometry. The first one is our lane widths. I had 12 foot out here for a very long time, and when you have that plus a median plus open shoulders, it feels like you got 14, 15 feet. It feels like I've got a runway and I can go really fast. Because this is still a U.S. numbered route, SCDOT will not let us go below 11 feet. That is their policy. So we need to work with them to get that down. There are other things we will do that will change that language though, but 11 feet is our recommendation. And I've mentioned the speed reduction through here and what we would like to do at 35 miles per hour. This does not mean we're going to do a uniform posted speed throughout all of William Hilton Parkway though. We're going to look at it contextually. And here we need to change that speed limit from 45 miles per hour down. Reduce the signal cycle duration. Sometimes we do need to look at how we do that. Your adaptive signal system is already working through that right now. It's providing that change of signal systems. We want to incorporate crossing patterns that work, so adjusting those signal timings to help bring more crossings for bicycles and pedestrians is going to be important. And then we also have to look at different types of controlled intersections. This is essentially how are we going to assign the right-of-way? If we keep it on William Hilton Parkway and never let the side streets go, we're going to have more congestion. Get frustrated, and they're going to begin to cut through neighborhoods and other things. So looking at traditional intersections, signalization, and some we're going to talk about some four-way stops and potentially some roundabouts too, when and where we need to do that. Number one thing we need to look at, it goes back to all of these other things, is conflicts, where we have those intersection points between vehicles. Up here, just when you have a full movement versus a controlled movement, you reduce the number of conflict points, those interactions between vehicles, just by changing how a median interacts. So that's what we want to look at. Focus the turning movements where they need to be, not necessarily restricting them, but focusing them where they need to be. That's going to make a big difference on how we move people here. And then, of course, providing protected pedestrian crossings. RRFBs, particular rapid flashing beacons, are one of the first things that we do. Moving from there, we can go into what you see up here, which is a hawk signal, which you've got some on South Forest, which controls traffic there, but also looking at signalized intersections. DOT will tell you that, and I've seen this in the number of studies that I've done and the intersections I've designed this way, better compliance comes with signalized intersections than hawk signal. Drivers do not understand what a hawk signal is. They don't know. Do I stop? Do I go? What do I do? Do I have to pay attention to this? So SCDOT will allow these, but they prefer to do a regular traffic signal. And so we'll work with them on where that fits into the overall program.
Sorry, a quick question there. For lack of a better term, I call it an all-stop. And that is, instead of allowing pedestrian bicyclist crossing and there's still turning traffic, there's no turning traffic as well. Is that included in these designs?
Absolutely. So some of the things that we can intertwine into the signal system is what we call LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals, which is essentially an all-stop. And that just pauses the network just a little bit so that we get the pedestrians out ahead of those turning vehicles and the side street movements or the main street movements, easily to incorporate into the system with not a lot of infrastructure upgrades.
Hopefully a longer interval for those of us who move more slowly or where there's so many lanes that you have to run across. Okay, thank you.
Not only crossing speed, but also volume is important too. And so we'll look at all of those things. And then supportive of all of this is when we have interconnectivity. I've mentioned that previously today, but how we can create connections that allow not just motor vehicles, but pedestrians to move. By those opportunities, people stay off of the larger corridors. Traffic speeds then are more appropriate for there, and the volume is more appropriate for how we're moving through the system.
As I mentioned before, this segment is part of the Mid-Island District. We think there's a great opportunity to identify that as such, the center of our island with signature landscape. Councilwoman, you mentioned the whole notion of the pedestrian safety of the medians. We're looking in this particular section as well to not only plant that, well landscape those islands, but to make that median even wider as well. So we don't want to encourage jaywalking, but as Jonathan's about to discuss in some of this intersection design, as we get folks across these wide streets, we got to get them some refuge for sure. And also an opportunity for us to maybe uplight some of that landscape, again, indigenous landscape elements, but create a legitimate center of our town in this district with this segment. The preliminary engineering portion, now we've talked about all of these, the tools and the mechanisms. now we've got some options for some of these intersections and some of these safety considerations, and let Jonathan go through those and show you what the snapshot of the whole corridor may look like after improvement.
Absolutely. So what you see here is William Hilton Parkway number 3 from Beach City down to Matthews Road. And what we've really done is taken out a lot of the crossing points that were there. Got some strange geometry through there. You've got parallel back-to-back left turn lanes that overlap with each other, which is really one of the worst layouts that you can have because it's just free movement through there. You've got individuals who are cheating the system at Beach City and coming down and coming through instead of turning left because they don't want to wait there. So then they're whipping a U-turn, and that's actually, as Addie mentioned, that's where we saw one of the crashes happen as we were all standing out there. Coming down towards the Starbucks, we witnessed another crash later that day just because they didn't understand had the right of way and were not paying attention. Distraction is the number one cause for a lot of that, but it makes a big difference. So what you see here is us kind of providing, again, uniform design language. People that expectancy of what you're going to encounter when you come to an intersection, it makes sense. You've seen this before. You know how to drive this. And so making recommendations at Palmetto Parkway for a proposed traffic signal with 4 legs of crossing there. Again, we see a lot of pedestrian traffic coming up out of the Oaks and coming along the trail, wanting to cross here for destinations on the other side. So creating that so that they're not cutting through the median at that location. Improving cross access within the Southwood Park Drive area and how it interfaces with the Oaks and improving that interconnectivity through there. Closing up some median crossings as we get down here. Still providing that left turn access, which retailers find important. So we're not limiting anyone's access. We're, again, focusing it to where it needs to be a key intersection. And that leftover right there at Northridge, that's essentially where the Starbucks is. That would be a signalized crossing there. So movements would be controlled. But as was brought up just a few minutes ago, we would set it up so that it's an all stop for movements going through there. Pedestrians who would have the right of way. But we would still control the movements for the left and the exiting movements when their cycle is called. So we balance those movements and provide, again, that safe crossing. A lot of the stuff that Jim mentioned earlier in the interim would be built upon with this plan. So trail lighting, the in-puck or the puck lighting in pavement, all of those things are kind of lifting up and building upon each other. So that effort is not gone, it's just enhanced. Controlling the movements, and again, taking out down at Matthews, there's a sweeping right turn through there where the pedestrians have to cross, go stand in a tiny island, and then cross again. Taking that out, it's not necessary. We can design that so it's a seamless cross, but still, again, accommodating the industrial development that's to the north where we have large trucks and access into the Northridge Plaza as well as Sea Turtle for those trucks. Focus on just 2 intersections. I've already sort of discussed these, but again, you can see the improvements here in how we would lay this out. You can see the channelized movements providing generous crossing locations and generous crossing widths here for the crosswalks, uniform stamping of those crosswalks, which has already begun coordination with SCDOT, and that directional signalized crossing down there at Sea Turtle Plaza with that left coming in. All of these things begin to enhance the safety.
Tom, are you adding pavement or taking the pavement out to these?
Great question. We're actually taking pavement out. And so one of the points I failed to mention in my notes here is that you're actually also improving, because of the way you're setting these medians up, you're actually enhancing your stormwater by removing impervious surface. So there's a sort of a double-edged benefit from this, not only pedestrian and bicycle and mobility safety, we also have an environmental impact as well in a positive direction.
Second question, how many cars travel through this area on a daily basis?
You're in the upward 30,000 vehicles per day. I can get you a precise number, but that's
That's what I was.
Another option here we mentioned, I failed to mention this at the beginning. You'll see these options laid out, option 1, option 2. Option 1 obviously is the one that we feel strongly about, and option 2 are some of the things that we've considered. I mentioned to you earlier that we did consider some roundabouts through these locations. And to be very honest with you, the reason that was considered is for one of our primary reasons is speed reduction. Roundabouts do that, but they also provide incredible mobility. and keep traffic moving through there. So we did recommend that. We did present this to SCDOT. They did not have any reservations. We actually looked at a series of roundabouts through here where we looked at Palmetto, Northridge, and of course at Sea Turtle, providing that mobility and access as well.
Your conclusion?
Our conclusion was to actually go with something that was a little more uniform on the corridor, which is what I just recommended with option one, where we have the traffic signals at those locations. The reason being is that we do slow traffic with this. What we find though is that pedestrian safety is not as strong crossing at a roundabout as it is at a knowing that we have over 4 fatalities, 3 of which included pedestrians at this location. That is a priority, and so we waited.
I don't disagree with your conclusion in that regard, but I also think that Hilton Head is well-known for circles. It's a branding issue. And then secondly, it does slow traffic and it has a place, it's a placemaker.
Absolutely
So
is a placemaker.
I think that there are balances to be made there.
Sure. Certainly something that can still be discussed.
Excuse me, is there an optimum placement of the crosswalk coming off of a roundabout?
Well, you'll notice that in this drawing that's up there, we actually have also a rectangular rapid flashing beacon crossing at that location at Northridge. The trouble that you find is that there is an optimum spacing that is recommended from FHWA. You probably have it memorized. But it's not close within the circle. So you begin to get outside of the circle. You're within 40 to 50 feet outside of the circle. What happens though is that if drivers are not paying attention, they're going to come, especially exiting, they're going to come out of that and they may not see the pedestrian.
Excuse me, I don't want to get into the weeds, but in this particular area, where you have a circle opportunity may not be where the optimal crossing for pedestrians, and they may get the dedicated light.
And that's what you see actually on screen is that the dedicated crossing would be at Northridge. Not necessarily. We are providing it at all the roundabouts as well. I will tell you that both of these options work. They work great. Both have been presented to SCDOT. There was no hesitation on either. And so these were some schematics we shared with them. You can see kind of the configurations in a little more detail here. These are not the traditional circles that you do have on the island today. These are modern roundabout designs. What you've got are more of a rotary design. A couple that are starting to pop up that are more modern. So these are a little more intuitive for drivers and pedestrians, but you can sort of see the spacing away from the circle as you look at the crossing locations there as they were laid out. So let me jump to the conclusion here, right? So you can see that the pros and cons associated with this, with signalized intersection, it doesn't reduce the number of conflict points to the same level as a roundabout. I think that was already expressed in some of the commentary we've heard today. And they don't necessarily control speeds as great as a roundabout. But they do have a lot of benefits. They are a higher level control for pedestrians, which is a very large concern for us. And the way we're channelizing this, we're taking out some of the unsignalized conflicts with that system. Roundabouts, again, they provide a gateway, as was mentioned earlier. There is some fatigue on the island associated with roundabouts. And then the close spacing of multiple roundabouts, because what we had shown there to the traffic lights, while that spacing does work, I've modeled it. At times, when you may have some oversaturated conditions, it could back up into some of those intersections.
Your recommendation is a signalized intersection.
Correct. That's where we are at this point. Still working through all the final details, though. Again, both options do work.
Do the roundabout options require any more right-of-way?
Slight bit of right-of-way on the side streets. The way William Hilton Parkway was designed originally with a very large right-of-way, you can fit either of these options in there. It's really just the side streets and how you tie in. So we're talking about really small areas. The main circle fits within your existing right-of-way, which you don't find that often on corridors in South Carolina.
One thing, and this is great. This is great to hear some of your thoughts on roundabouts signalized intersection in a stretch of road, right, where people have been injured and killed in an area that we wouldn't think about a roundabout or a signalized intersection. So I think the exercise that we have to keep doing is, one, I don't want to just throw out the roundabouts, but I'm more interested in what's the most efficient and most safe enhancement. We haven't dove completely deep into all those details yet, but it looks like sounds like some of you would like us to continue to explore a roundabout option and not just go all in towards this signalized intersection. Some feedback is needed.
I agree with that. There may be other places along the corridor that could introduce a traffic circle beneficially, and so then it becomes a theme. So that's all I'm trying to.
As long as it's not a turbo. I just thought I'd throw that in, Jonathan. That's for you.
One other question is, does the Mid-Island District call for signals versus roundabouts? I don't know.
Get that specific when we looked at that. We know that we need to improve the roads for, people and vehicles, but we didn't dive into intersection treatment.
Throwaway roundabouts.
So just curious, is there a combination of these two that would potentially work as well?
Absolutely.
I'm sure you had to think about that a little bit
We
as you're
have.
going through it,
Correct.
but it's not here for a reason.
Exactly. We've looked at hybrid scenarios where, as Mr. Ames brought up, there could be a key strategically placed roundabout coming in from either direction that would begin to slow traffic down. Again, contextually creating a place here is really important. It sets the tone, and the roundabout does that more effectively than a signal. That placement and how it interacts with your existing signal system is very key. So yes, we've looked at that, and we can elaborate more on that at your liking.
I would weigh in one last time on the roundabout versus signalized intersection. I'm for pedestrian bicyclist safety first, and I want to see a schematic of how a roundabout would deal with pedestrian and bicyclist crossing.
This is that summary graphic I mentioned before.
My 2 cents in on the
I'm sorry.
roundabout. No,
Go ahead, Alex.
sure. I don't know if this was a unwritten rule or just something that I've observed here on Hilton Head. Very intentional about not having traffic signals I would describe as side streets. Most of the areas that we have intersections, side streets, we describe a roundabout. So I don't want to close the door on the roundabout discussion, or more inclined to say that we know that we will have additional capacity needs on the side streets, and roundabouts to me probably work a lot better than signal intersections. As far as balancing the thoroughfare versus access, I'll leave that up to the experts as far as
Summary slide I made mention before of taking all those elements and putting them together into a perspective. Tammy, I'm sorry, Ms. Becker. So it's simply a graphic that shows the increased width of the median buffer between the trail system and a consistent trail system on both sides of the road. Wherever we have vehicle, pedestrian / bicycle crossings, we have standard crosswalk so that everyone recognizes the inherent conflict. And then robust planting down that median as well, and creating that signature for the Mid-Island. That's Parkway 3. Parkway 2 is another segment that we've gone into a deeper dive on preliminary engineering, specifically on the Main Street portion. Again, not lost on anyone here. It begins with safety. It's reducing all those conflict points and the various modes of travel. It's safety for everyone, and also continuing to reinforce the identity of Main Street. It's a retail destination. It's a restaurant and office destination. We think it. So this segment connects to on the left image, connects to the left side of the left image and shows a portion of that as it marries up with the segment we just discussed. And it goes all the way to the west, depending on your orientation on the island, or the north to Wilbourn. So it's a very key segment for sure. And the town has just recently taken ownership of the other portion of Main Street, and there are needs for it. So this is the study area, and it isn't just Main Street and Parkway 2, but it's also the connecting streets between those two. And there's a lot of missing teeth from a pedestrian standpoint and bicycle standpoint on Main Street, and bringing that consistency to that and these connecting streets.
Yes, I think the bicycle and pedestrian connectivity is going to be key along these streets, particularly, with the schools adjacent to it. And also just formalizing where each mode should be within the right of way, and making sure that those modes know where there should be, where turning movements happen along there as well. As we've talked about, there's different ways we can look at pedestrian crossings, whether it's a raised crossing on some of these to RFB, Hawk, formal signalized intersection. There's a whole host of things we can do on these corridors to really begin to enhance not only the safety, as I've spoken about, but also the comfort of all these users, because it's really important along this area as we have several schools here, and thinking about students accessing the schools, not just with the bus trips to them as well, but I think of high schoolers and accessing jobs. Not every high schooler has a car. How do they get to jobs within the area? So it's really important, again, thinking about those transit options, access to school, and creating opportunities out freely and comfortably throughout this space, particularly with all the schools located right here. I think it's going to be critical to move forward. In terms of intersection, looking at taking away these right turn lanes and really kind of simplifying that intersection. Again, that helps with the safety aspect of pedestrians and bicycles crossing, and also expectations for drivers of where they should be as well. And not slowing those speeds. Again, we talked about speeds, but removing those speeds, slow, and vehicle movement intentional.
Also, as I mentioned before, Main Street is a great opportunity for us to reinforce what I think is a pretty attractive character now. It's a fairly narrow street. It's got some movement to it. It's got tree cover for the most part adjacent to it. And I think we want to take further advantage of that through the landscape. Let the green environment come into the street, create more attractive and walkable street environment. As you can see, there are places where we have no walking at all, and to brand this as being a special place among a few special places on Hilton Head Island, which again is. So that has been the focus of Main Street from Wilbourn up to Hospital, and all of these intersections in between. Again, you can see the movement of Main Street as it meanders through. One thing to keep in mind is that there's not any consistency to the width of the right-of-way and the public domain that we have for Main Street and some of these side street connections as well. We've got the luxury, if you will, of easements to the west and south of Whooping Crane, which we'll take full advantage of. Gives us more room for a section and for pedestrian comfort. And it gets more narrow as you go to North Main Street. Side streets vary from time to time. So we've got some segments and sections that.
Brian mentioned, we really have a lot of limited sidewalks, pathways throughout the area. We have some pathway on the north side of William Hilton Parkway, but those side streets don't have any bicycle pedestrian facilities nor into the adjacent. So when we think about the considerations, not only taking into account that right away that is available, but thinking about user comfort along that street, accessing those businesses, crossings were those to happen, thinking of the school age to the high school kid and the parents and everybody in between, not only accessing the businesses and the workers through there. We're really thinking about how do we apply a design that's both context sensitive to what's happening along there, but also takes into account the right of way that we have available within, reducing speeds and improving connectivity across Main Street and.
Let's dive into some of the preliminary engineering work that has been prepared. And as Brian mentioned earlier, we've got inconsistent right-of-way widths and easements all throughout both segments here. So we're going to talk about the Main Street section, and we're also going to talk about North Main section. And so we're going to separate those two because there's varying widths, there's varying desires through there, and we're going to look at a couple different typical sections on this. So we've approached this with areas where we have both an easement present and then areas where we don't have that. And you can see in this typical section up here, what we're proposing here are 9-foot travel lanes and then a 7-foot buffered bike lane on both sides. So you got a 2-foot buffer with a 5-foot bike lane, and then of course you've got the curb and gutter, which would be parallel to the tree lawn, and then and shown on both sides would be a 10-foot pathway that would provide your mobility through there as well. You can see the existing easement through this section of Main Street where we've got 50 feet of right-of-way, which is our minimum, and then the need where it is and where it's not of 10 feet on either side to fit what we've got in here. So thinking about that and what that may look like, just from a perspective standpoint, you can see here, you can see the bicyclist with the pedestrian buffer. Again, standardized lighting through this, the typical 10-foot pathway on both sides. The 2-foot travel lanes, again, wanting to narrow that down, of course, enhancing our crossings, different locations. Again, standardizing, we've talked about design language, standardizing your crosswalks and this crossing location so that drivers and pedestrians know what they're encountering. So option 2.
Sorry, can you go back to the nice colorful slide? So some places along this, there's a landscape median in various, with various width and various shape through there. And so it looks as though some parts of it would not have a landscape median and some parts would. And from best I can tell, the ones that would are closer to the traffic circle on Whooping Crane.
That is correct.
The 9-foot lanes, I guess it was necessary to take out any of that landscape median. I just feel like there's going to be a little pushback from folks who frequent that area to take away the trees in that area. But I recognize that we have to make some trade-offs. At some point, I guess, we're going to ask the question about stakeholder input from folks that particularly live in, there are 4 of us here that live within the gated community of HHP, and we come and go from that area a lot, but reach out to maybe the POA or residents there, and also the merchants in the Main Street area and the businesses on the other side. So at some point, perhaps we could talk about where will stakeholder input come from.
Councilwoman, one of the trade-offs, I take your point very well. Believe me, we looked long and hard at that. We determined that it would be more useful to all users if we took that green space in the middle that's tough to maintain, tough to grow plants in. Plants don't typically grow in medians, and put that outboard. Let's narrow the street, and let's put the green, let's put the trees, let's put the light fixtures in the pedestrian and bicycle environment, and make that more walkable and automobiles in the full stop.
I think it's very important to understand that trade-off, and that while some sense is taken away, more is given back. What I think I'm hearing.
Further question on that. I gather that William Hilton Parkway as a state-owned road has to be minimum of 11. This can be 9. How does the 9 compare with what the lane is right now?
Got inconsistent variable widths out there. It varies from some places, over 12 feet down to 10 feet in some spots where you have the medians come in. So this consistency, that kind of getting rid of that accordion effect that's occurring, the consistent lanes through here, your effective width is larger than what this really is. So this really gets to, with a 2-foot buffer there, you're really looking at about a 11-foot travel lane. So it will be large enough to accommodate, delivery trucks and parcel trucks that need to come through there. But the markings for a normal vehicle coming through there, it's going to feel a little bit tighter. They're going to drive a little bit slower. You already have that, so this is how we can translate that language back to it. As Brian was saying, this is a very interesting street. It's really one of those streets you do want to drive slow on if you travel it often. It's actually one of the streets I was actually more inclined to get out of my car and walk because it was an interesting street. Given how it meanders through there and what was going on. So that's what we've attempted to do with the 9-foot lanes through here, plus the gutter width. It still gives you an effective 11 to accommodate larger vehicles.
Would you contemplate a lower speed limit on here, like 25 or something?
Absolutely. Yeah, you would be somewhere in the 25 miles per hour at the highest posting.
John,
Yes, sir.
you're showing a 50-foot right-of-way, 7'4" for tree lawn and so on. What's in that space at this point on either side of the road? Is that vegetated? Is that a shoulder? What is that?
Yeah, so a lot of things have to happen in that 7-foot tree lawn, right? So the landscaping goes in there, but you also have utilities that go in there. Communications need to go in that space. So it is listed as a tree lawn, but it really kind of serves as a multi-purpose area for that to move utilities. You can do some of that underneath the pathways if you need to as well, depending on where you're at.
The assumption is that there'd be a 10-foot pathway easement on both sides of the road to be clear-cut for a pathway.
Correct. Correct.
One more thing, through that corridor with the businesses, for the left-hand turns, are there left-hand turns being taken out? Well, I guess there's no median anymore, never mind, except for closer to the Whipping Crane Circle. There exists a left-hand turn when you come out of that circle and turn right onto Main Street to go then left into the shopping center.
Maintain left turn lanes at key locations like the one you just described for that reason.
I think that if it's not pointed out somewhere, I think, and it maybe, I know there's some other diagrams over here.
Absolutely.
So maybe particularly point that out for folks who care about going to those places.
Very good point through there. So
Another question, if I could. Is the right-of-way on South Main Street as wide as the right-of-way on North Main Street?
no, it's not.
Some of these things will either have to take some land, some of these things can't be implemented.
Correct. And you're going to see that as we get into some of the other slides on
Sorry,
those.
got
No,
ahead of you.
no, I love the initiative here. And so option 2, again, on the Main Street side, so we're talking about on the lower section through here, this is another option, essentially where we would take out the on-street, the bike lanes out there. We would put in 10-foot travel lanes with a 2-foot typical curb and gutter. And then you see fitting this in within the right-of-way there, that variable tree lawn utility space through there. So that's going to adjust as we hit those areas where we have tighter right-of-way and wider right-of-way, depending on the curvature of the roadway. And then a 10-foot path would go in the easement on both sides. Now, the path would also facilitate bicycles and pedestrians at a 10-foot width. So you would have that separated movement from the vehicles to the outsides of that. And this is a representative image of what that may look like. Again, you can see the common typology there that I've described earlier. But overall, kind of where we're at in the overall segment.
Main difference is you take out the bike lane on the road and you add 1 foot to each drive, and then you add width to the tree lane, tree lawn.
And it varies, that tree lawn varies in width depending on where we're at.
And it gives you a little bit more separation between the trail and the moving lanes of traffic. And the street is just for automobiles at this juncture, and bicyclists and pedestrians use the parallel trails.
And right now, we've been improving the sidewalk on the side closest to 278 is the best way I can describe it, because it varies as whether you're going north, south, east, or west, I think. But there's no sidewalk on the other side.
Where the options are prioritized.
Correct.
Why would you put this behind the first option that we just, what do you like about this one better?
We were going to ask you the same thing.
Exactly.
Well, I like this one, so,
You know, both of them work, right? With options, there's been some desire for on-street bicycle mobility. Separate. And so that kind of was the reason for option one falling into there.
May I add too? Because I asked the same question. I heard all of your comments, and some appreciated pathway off the road like we have in our island versus bike lanes on the road at the last workshop. And I asked the same thing. I asked Sean the other day. It's not. It's simply a different menu item. But at the end of the day, Main Street, because of the businesses, has a higher potential to be much more walkable than not, right? A lot of our pathways are used by bikes, e-bikes now, and bikes and people, and it's less walking and more biking. Main Street, when you're parking and walking to the next shop or parking and walking to lunch, you start, if you're a traffic engineer and you're a good one, you're going to tell your municipality as a client to say, separating those folks from going fast on a bike, different than those folks that are walking somewhere, separate them. That's what a traffic engineer tells us. And that's the big difference. And it's about what our appetite is in terms of how we want that street to function in the future.
Mayor, I think it'd be helpful when we have public comment. I know there's some folks here from the biking community that can provide us with, I really appreciate Tool Design being a part of this group so that we have the expertise in pedestrian and bicyclists. But I think our local bicyclists can also help us in looking at these options along this way. So I look forward to their comments.
I guess the reason I like this one is better, and we all have our own preferences with regard to aesthetics. But for me, the aesthetics of this is far more less markings on the road, etc. It just
Let's talk about North Main again. You're going to see two similar kind of approaches to this. Some of the differences being some of the scale at which we do some of the improvements. And the most notable here is the tree lawn and the pathway. And what that shows is we've got, again, 9-foot travel lanes. We have a 7-foot buffered bike lane. We have a tree lawn, and then we have a pathway. That tree lawn, though, contracts a little bit down to a 5-foot separation, and then we've got an 8-foot pathway on both sides. 6 feet on either side outside of the right-of-way would be necessary to put in an easement for a portion of the trail or the shared use path there to make that work. All the other elements are similar as to the south, so this would be North Main Street between Whooping Crane and Hospital Center. So that's sort of that northern section, if you will. That looks like, again, you can see the translation of how that would be. Again, very similar. Scale's a little bit tighter through here, so the elements become a little bit tighter from a trail standpoint and from tree lawn. Questions on this segment?
For option one, it says there's a proposed easement, and I think I read somewhere the other option is to reduce the buffer. It's on 64. That's what my note said. I don't know.
Correct. So you'll see that as we look at the different options on how we try to fit this through here.
Okay.
And how we fit this. So if we go to option two, you see a much more compact segment through here. Again, the bike lanes essentially move pathways, 5-foot tree lawn, 8-foot, but this fits within, doesn't require an easement. It does come down to you are combining some of the movements versus separating that, but the trade-off is you don't have to have an easement to fit this. Both function the same way. It's just how those are put together. And then this is kind of that visual interpretation of what that may look like from the different elements again. And one more option when we get just more convoluted, right? Let's get option 3 in here too. So again, on North Main Street, you can see this is basically, again, all the elements are the same. It's really the 3 options are how do we divide this up is the simplest way of saying that. 2 travel lanes at 9 foot. We've got a buffered bike lane at 7 foot, a curb and gutter, and then we have a what I call a utility strip in there, which is going to be variable width through there. It's roughly 2 feet as shown on the example here. And then we keep the pedestrians to the outside with a 5-foot sidewalk. Still accomplishing the same mobility. It's how do you want to dice that? Options. This one though, just like option 2, fits within the existing representative image of what that may look like. And you'll see in some places, as shown here, it's tough to get grass to grow in a 2-foot strip. So that effective width is really about 7 feet, depending on where you're at when you do have some of those utilities. So that would be some sort of textured hardscaping through there.
So just real quick, going back to earlier comments, when we talked about intersections and roads, to train the eye to see things the same way. So would it be your opinion that on these, both on either side of the circle, that they would be the same? Meaning that either the paths would be, bike paths would be on the road or separate? That way you're not trying to alter between the two. Yeah, just want to point that out.
Great point. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, if we move past typical sections, let's talk about some of our corridors themselves. And Wilburn Road.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir, I'm
John.
sorry.
Couple of general questions on the Hooping Crane, on Main Street. Every drawing shows lighting standards. Are they pulled by SCDOT or are they local decisions?
Well, in this case, on Main Street, this is your street, so you would control what that is.
General comment. I don't think we have developed sort of an attitude towards lighting on Hilton Head, where, how, and so on. And so I think that has to be an important part of discussing at this point. And just a personal opinion on the sections, I think it's important for bikers to be able to ride on the road, if at all possible. I think the scale of option 3 at the last page feels more like Main Street than option 1, where we're going overboard with easements and so on. Personal opinion. And what about signage? We don't talk about signage. Is that outside of SCDOT, so we don't have to worry about it?
Correct.
While we're talking about, thanks for bringing up lighting, it says MTSCP.
That's the standard light fixture that we've put forth in our systems section of this document in front of you.
Okay.
We're taking those systems and bringing them forward and part of the solutions. To your point, David, Councilman, which you make a great point of, and that is lighting. We're a dark skies community, and I think we've got to be very careful with our lighting. This is down lighting. It's on a mast arm. It's not a glowing globe. It's directed lighting. It's got rear cutoff, but this is a walkable street. We need to provide some lighting.
I'm not resisting the idea.
But it needs to be careful.
I'm just saying politically, we better have our act together where and how we're doing it.
Agreed.
I add one more slight humorous situation about lighting is that when some lighting came up before the design review board here, we were told that it was called Audubon lighting. I assume that was Audubon, like the birds was Autobahn, like the highway in Germany.
Audubon, the German highway. Yeah.
So my preference is the bird type lighting and not any.
Right.
Sorry, Mayor.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's talk about some of the other key corridors that connect into to Main Street here, and we're going to talk about Wilburn, and we're going to talk about Museum Street. I'm going to show you a little bit more details associated with those, but again, focusing in on Wilburn, it's one of the key streets that provides access to your schools. You got all three of your schools in one location. Head over there anytime between hours of 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. You've got congestion. You got in the afternoon, in the morning time, you got people walking, you got people riding bikes, you got people driving there. And so Wilburn, as it exists today, really functions under a congested scenario. And so what we've recommended is from Main Street kind of coming down to where it intersects with William Hilton Parkway would be to enlarge that section, again, putting in not only just motor vehicle laneage there with dual lefts, a through and a right, and then 2 receiving lanes. Also providing for the pathways as well to connect up to the central pathways that would be on William Hill Parkway for those who are riding. You've got that connectivity. That will help to reduce congestion. It'll also help to flush this intersection. And then providing for where we currently only have 2 crosswalks. And if you ever looked at the crosswalk that's on Wilburn, you are essentially, the way it's laid out today, pedestrians come out almost into William Hilton Parkway and then cut across and then cut back in. It is a very unsafe configuration. So changing that up, removing the channelized movements that are out there today, which traveling up 278 SCDOT has already been removing all of those free-flowing movements, providing that third and fourth crossings that are out there on all sides to move traffic in and around that area. Typical section of what that may look like, just kind of get a scale for that. Again, these are 10-foot travel lanes. We would do a more narrow turn lane in between them, slightly smaller. We still can move cars. It's still wide enough to accommodate that. You see a tree lawn of 8 feet and then 10 pathways on either side. It does require us to do a little bit of a easement necessary on one side just to accommodate that. We can look at, and that really comes down to just how it has to align with the opposite side. How to make those alignments work out correctly. Intersections, though. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you're talking about that, I'm gonna have to go back and walk over there and see what that misalignment you're talking about. Is it possible to change that without the additional right-of-way on an interim basis?
You'd have to rebuild the street on the other side of the street to make that work. That's really the alignment, it's the throughput. I've got a little bit of play crossing an intersection. What I'm showing here is a perfect 0 offset. So I've got about 6 feet, half a lane width I can do. So we might be able to narrow it down to maybe it's just a foot of easement through there. Is the substation side. So I'm hoping we can get a willing partner to help us out with that easement. It's not ever going to be built on. So.
Right. I was just wondering on an interim basis if we couldn't straighten it out a little bit until then.
Good question, though. So thinking about, yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Have you been out there in the morning and in the afternoon when the mamas are dropping off and picking up the kids?
Absolutely.
We're going to be able to accommodate that better than the way it is now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's congested. This was one of the things we talked about with Jim initially, wanting to enhance this. Desperately needs it.
Patty, I have a question regarding the traffic circles. As a car peels off in the right lane to take a right-hand turn and there's a pedestrian crosswalk, makes sense to have something added in the pavement in anticipation of that crosswalk so that the right-hand turning movement is made aware of it. There because we have so many of them.
I think, yes, the short answer is yes. And I also think with these pedestrian crossings, we can also raise them potentially and kind of put more emphasis on the pedestrian crossing there. But really kind of getting that deflection really tight is going to be important as well.
We've got a couple options here. Oh, yes, sir.
I may be a little bit outside of the scope here, but I think it's relative. I don't know if you've looked at this. I'm just putting it out there. because of the schools being such a hot spot. So I can appreciate what we're doing. Also concerned about traffic sort of downstream as we're leaving. We're going off island to leave the island or get to the Cross Island Parkway. That problem, particularly when you're westbound, wanted to turn left on Cross Island Parkway. There's the stacking there. There's not enough room for stacking there. So, and I'm sure there's crash data to support what I'm saying. Just curious to know, is that part of this exercise or is that at a later date?
So for the eastbound movement, currently there's a single lane. Accommodate to reduce that stacking that's happening in the mornings out on William Hilton Parkway. And today there's a transition zone. This is the intersection where you transition from 2 lanes westbound to 3 lanes. Coming off Wilburn is this free-flowing movement. And so what we've left here is only 2 through, and we're dropping that right onto Wilburn. So they'll have a dedicated right turn lane. Still, the 3 lanes still remain on William Parkway. We've begun to look as that transitions down Cross Island and how that transition occurs. So that has started as a part of this. Okay. All right. Let's talk about options. So here at Wilburn, Main Street and Bus Drive, you know, currently we have the offset intersection that's out there, and that creates a lot of conflicts. They're not set up in necessarily the best orientation for how we move traffic. You got buses coming in up through here, you got parents coming up, you got walkers coming over. And so what we have recommended here is a roundabout at this location. Slightly larger roundabout than what we traditionally would require for a single lane, and the reason that's buses. You an SU-40, call it, trying to navigate that doesn't have the ability to turn as easily. Slightly wider lanes. We've got a dedicated left coming in. And then there's other elements associated with Wilburn. You've got a left only onto Main Street. That's going to help separate traffic a little bit more and move it through there. But Bus Drive has been realigned so that it comes in. Roundabout does a really good job of accommodating offset geometry and skews better than the intersection. Gives us more flexibility. So we can actually reduce this a little bit more depending on, you know, coordination with the school system and the schools. You know, that can shift a little bit more. We can adjust it. Roundabouts are very adaptable when it comes to that. And as Patty mentioned earlier, the crossings for these locations are lighted. They can also raise, elevate that pedestrian crossing through there. It also does a couple things. Roundabouts do slow traffic down, but also that just that slight verticality of crossing over a raised crossing also slows traffic. You'll notice that the crosswalks are only on 3 sides of the intersection. There's not one on that 4th side. That was all intentional. You've got more lanes coming up there. You've got buses that primary movement is that left. We wanted to keep the pedestrians on the upper side. Again, and that kind of fits all inside the school property as well from that standpoint.
So that brings up a question. Have you been in contact with the school district? Because they're getting ready to look at plans to redo a lot of things over there. Actually, they're going to start here in the next couple of months.
We have not had a conversation focused on these options. We wanted to present it first,
Okay.
And then that's our next stop.
One other question on the circle. Let's see if I can answer this right or ask this right. You said that the traffic circle slows traffic down. Does it also help increase the movement or decrease the time travel?
It does, from the standpoint of roundabouts are very keen at being able to move things slower but more efficiently.
Right.
Because you're taking out conflicting movements that have to occur, and it's uniform how it flows. So yes, time would be reduced. This, in combination with the Wilburn to the south, would make a huge difference on travel times in this area for parents dropping kids off, moving in, moving out.
I would highlight that. That's because when you start talking about slows traffic down, what does that increase traffic?
Counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is, and that's why how do I ask this question?
There's been a lot of research that's been done. In fact, if you deal with the MSTA arm of NCDOT, most of their schools that are being built in North Carolina, their entrances are built with roundabouts because they're so efficient. Because they're
That's a really good point to put out there as we were discussing all of these circle opportunities.
absolutely,
Alex.
absolutely.
Another circle opportunity to have the discussion with the school district. They could probably pay for a lot of this with the amount of money they're spending on security to sort of direct traffic out there. So just downstream where the middle school traffic and the high school traffic intersect, so we don't have in this discussion, to the mayor's point, as the school district is looking at redevelopment of the high school, there may be some opportunity there as well.
On their plans, it is a circle.
Another option, just to keep us moving along here, is the intersection, just looking at a four-way stop. Four-way stops can be very efficient, not as efficient as a roundabout or as a traffic circle or a signalized intersection, but this could be set up as either a four-way stop or as a traffic signal in the future should be warranted. You can see the laneage that's all set out here, accommodating lefts on either approach, throughs and rights, and again, right away to the south. This is a smaller footprint, which is why we show this. This is another option. This one has, adaptability for the future. Four-way stop, you can run it as a two-way stop. It can be signalized in the future if you do need that. But it tightens everything up from that standpoint and makes it all an option. The third option is, really keeping things as they are today, keeping that off alignment as it is. The lefts don't overlap, meaning they're not conflicting with each other, so you do have a positive offset from that standpoint. But again, this really just, other than the pedestrian enhancements, operationally, this is what you've got today. It doesn't really give you the benefit that you're looking for long term. This is still part of the design consideration. We consider it from that.
John, I don't know if we're trying to get feedback from comments, but the circle is civilized and hospitable. Traffic lights are injurious. I mean, they are brutal. And so I think we're a hospitable island. We ought to be having circles.
Reasons why it's number one here.
Except for the old circle where people used to get stuck on the inside.
It never got out.
Right.
Still there.
So of those three options, it seemed like option 3 ought to be off the board pretty
Yeah,
I'd agree
quickly.
with
So
that.
between 1 and 2. So between 1 and 2, which is safer for pedestrian crossing and bicyclist crossing? Common theme for me, obviously.
No, I think it's a great question. I think it, in this situation, again, contextually, this is a location where you anticipate there's going to be a lot of pedestrian traffic. So the roundabout would work quite well at this location. You're coming into a school system, you're trying to set there. That's not necessarily the same on William Hilton Parkway. This is different. The scale of this is much smaller too. So you're able to scan the intersection in a broader perspective, and you can see a lot of traffic and pedestrian movement quicker. Plus, unlike William Hilton Parkway, we can actually raise pedestrian crossings here. Not something SCDOT allows us.
Is it our street or is it the county street? This street is our street.
Well,
Which street?
Yeah, it is
Wilborn.
complicated.
Wilborn is SCDOT up until you get into the school.
so
Close to
before
that.
or after bus drive?
It turns after as you get up towards the schools, but bus drive is the county. So then it starts up by the stop sign up by the high school.
It's a complicated mess because if you look at GIS, the school system owns it, but then you talk to DOT, they're like, we own this. There's conversations that have to occur on.
School districts say they own it? Because
According to
because
the,
if the school district says they own it, then
Oh, I'm
DOT
sure.
would just give it to them.
yeah, and that might be the path we go.
There you go.
Right, and if the DOT Mayor, if I could, if the school doesn't own it and the DOT does, it's a simple letter to acquire it into our network to make these improvements.
It looks as though the pedestrian crossings and the roundabout are not close to the circle itself, and not so far away that there's acceleration. It looks like it's closer to the circle, but not too close.
Right. So in addition to bus drive, we also looked at a variety of intersections along William Hilton Parkway as WHP2, trying to enhance, not making major geometric changes at these locations, but again, focusing on how each of those connecting streets coming from Main Street would be set up and they interface with William Hilton Parkway, and focused on trail connectivity, creating standardized crossings, uniform crossings of William Hilton Parkway. And you can see an example here at Museum Street. We would set this up. This is a signalized intersection. We took the slip lane out. I can't tell you how many accidents and crashes I've seen at slip lane configurations, and especially if we're prioritizing pedestrian safety through here. Let's remove that. It's not necessary. You still accommodate the mobility that you need, but setting some of these streets up so that it fits the footprint of where you're headed into. Again, that design language translating into what you're approaching, both from William Hilton Parkway and into Main Street.
So I'm starting to see this more as a theme, but not just here, but are slip lanes going away, period?
They are, yeah. And the reason being is I can't tell you the number of studies where State Farm, Allstate have paid me to go out and look at an intersection, and they have put money up to the state to say, we pay so much money a year for crashes here, we'll pay to remove this if you'll permit it, because it's accident claims, and they don't want to do that. And so slip lanes are notorious for that, because you think about what happens. You think there's a gap, you start to go like that, you jam on the brakes, the guy or gal behind you hits that. That's a claim. It costs them millions of dollars a year. So by offsetting that, by removing it, yes, please take them away. They're dangerous.
Anything I say is going to be anecdotal, except for the frequency with which I go Museum Street and then take a right turn to go to Cross Island, which is about daily. But anyhow, I see a lot of kids, and some of them, might be going to work over at Walmart, but they cross from over by Carpaccio, the Italian restaurant, coming from the Museum Street side to Pembroke. And I know that our adaptive system now recognizes cyclists and pedestrians there, but that's an area that I'm really concerned about. And some folks who are working, I see them crossing over there. I guess they're going to Walmart to work, or they're coming from Walmart, having been shopping there. So that particular pedestrian crossing on the side where there is one now, I think that's look really closely and make sure we've covered everything we can to make that as safe as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Looking at Museum Street, I mentioned this earlier, that transitional street in between Main Street and William Hilton Parkway, setting that design language up. You can see here 9.5-foot travel lanes. Keeping that center turn lane, business access is still important. One side of the street, we've got in the existing easement a 10-foot tree lawn. The other side, we're proposing a 6-foot tree lawn with a 10-foot pathway. And within the easement that's there today, again, moving, just as you mentioned there, Councilwoman talking about pedestrians moving down through there, but focusing it on the singular side, and then still providing local access for all the businesses with this, fitting that within the existing right. Then we move to Central Avenue to Exchange Street. You can see here, again, just how this begins to connect with all of this. Brought this up as well. These are some of the planted medians that we had. You can see this on the example here. Again, providing that left turn lane where it's necessary for the village. We've got left turning traffic coming in there, also planting opportunities through there. We've got RRFB crossings at key locations like Merchant Street, and as well as down at Central Avenue. We've also looked at how we didn't make major changes to the the roundabout there at Whooping Crane, but we did standardize some of the pavement markings through there and looked at the operations of how that would interface, and then looking at some of those crossings and then potentially controlling that or lighting those as you're coming in. Highlight the pedestrians that will be crossing, because both of these are somewhat removed, at least on Whooping Crane, from the central circle. So you may not be bicycles crossing at those locations.
John, in your opinion, is the circle operating optimally at this point?
Yeah, from what we've seen and observed out there, there are some things that we would recommend, and we've talked about that. Signage is really important at this location. There's not a lot in pavement markings, so we've made recommendations for markings. I observe this, and we have videos of it, you see drivers not really knowing where they want to be, and so they're kind of wandering across lanes, especially if they're going from William Hilton Parkway up Whooping Crane onto Main Street. They'll cut across lanes. So really, for a little bit of money, you could put some pavement markings out there and just some guide signs.
I would say drive it every day. It is probably one of the more safer ones that we have, because the speed limit's slower, and you do have the people that are guessing which way they're going to go, but it's not at the speed that if somebody is going to jolt out or whatever, they're going to get hit. So it's interesting.
Presumably, there's a conversation with Hilton Head Plantation that needs to take place. Improvements.
Absolutely.
There are. That would increase the safety, but the volume is not at a point where you're by any means.
Thank you.
Question on,
Yes, sir.
on Merchant Street, and may or may not have happened through y'all's visual studies. Because when you're leaving from their plantation right onto Main Street, left onto Merchant Street, because of the way that Merchant Street intersects with William Hilton Parkway, as to if you're trying to go left or right onto William Hilton Parkway. And there have been times where folks have actually made a left hand onto William Hilton Parkway and going down the wrong way. So I'm just curious, is this going to address that as well?
Yes. Signage and wayfinding. We even heard of some of that occurring up at Whooping Crane as it intersects there as well. That right signage is important as part of
While we're on that, and it's the one, Central Avenue, just where Mr. Bound was talking about the crossing. That pedestrian bicyclist crossing there is a little too close from those turning left off of William Hilton Parkway onto Central Avenue. Learned a lot about folks there, because that's when you're accelerating, is making that turn, and I'm afraid for the acceleration there at that crossing.
Yep, so you can see we did a blow up here. We've changed that geometry a little bit on the next page. And I got it up on the screen here, trying to provide that crossing at a point where it's not too far past the radius.
Right.
That's where it should be, so that you still have that ability to see them as you're coming through and not in that acceleration zone. Or conversely, in the deceleration zone as you're coming.
Okay, yeah, it's confusing here. It looks like where it is now, but you say you've moved that, okay.
Adjusted it to accommodate, because we saw that as we were out there.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't tell from this drawing.
Sure. It doesn't quite get down to the scale of that. And then looking at Central Avenue, this one, we don't have a center turn lane on that, but we do have again, consistent travel lanes through there at 9.5 feet, tree lawn, and then of course, we've got a pathway of 10 feet on the connector streets, and provides that local mobility, but given the volumes there, you don't need that out there. And then looking at how it comes into the intersection there with William Hilton Parkway, keeping the right turn lane there, but changing the geometry of how that interfaces with that. Sweeping left turn lane is gone. We've narrowed the street down, smaller street, providing that trail with a nice generous separation as you come up here, and then focusing those pedestrian movements at key locations where they're still visible and not in the acceleration zone. much closer to William Hook Parkway. Looking up here with Merchant Street, you can see the typical section for that. Very similar 9.5 travel lanes, variable lawn, tree lawn on one side, and of course a 10-foot pathway from that standpoint. Already kind of mentioned this earlier. As I got into it, Whooping Crane Circle, you can see some of the operational improvements we've talked about, just with some of the laneage and pavement markings through here, standardizing that, some typical signage associated with that that's just directly out of the MUTCD. What they would recommend for a roundabout, it's a little bit more than what's out there today, and then just pavement markings. No major structural changes other than where Main and North Main kind of circle, there's some channelizing islands. But overall, circle's operating well. This just enhances.
So one question, when you come out of HHP and make that right turn on the Main Street, you're showing that crossing very close to where someone's starting their acceleration, and you've got an RRFB there. So if I'm making that right-hand turn and someone has just turned on that signal, what do I do?
Well, I'm hoping that spacing of that and where that's at, you shouldn't be in a high acceleration zone through there because you're at a yield point for the roundabout.
Yeah.
And this just gives you that visual characteristic signal at that location.
Yeah, I'm worried about seeing it when I'm making the right-hand turn because I'm looking for traffic coming around from my left. So I may not see that. I don't know where that is to be able to see it.
Look at the spacing on that. We feel comfortable with the location, but we'll take another look at that as well. So let's move up a little bit more and let's cover the area from Exchange Street all the way up to Hospital Center. Again, you can kind of see the overall improvements here. We're going to focus on a couple of these key intersections. So let's jump in here. Again, at Exchange Street, I've talked about this before. I'm not going to beat a dead horse on this, but again, removing the right turn lane, the sweeping right turn lanes, focusing how the pedestrians move through this area, creating a more functional street on Exchange Street. And you can see the typical section there, looking at, again, travel lanes that are consistent with the area, 9.5 foot. Yes, sir.
That spot right there is one of the got-me's that just drives me crazy. And as my wife says, if you ever saw me drive, you would not believe it was me. But the lack of understanding of the laws, and it just forces people to break the law when they're going down that road. Can we pull that out and get it done next week? Please?
We'll do our best. Typical section there. I've mentioned all of these. The one difference on this one is that the pathway is 8 feet through here. And we can look at, if we need to, we can shift that just a little bit, increase that if that's something like the 9-foot travel lanes and a dedicated tree lawn area. Another interesting intersection. It's over.
Away too.
Go to 98.
Good. It's all about the solar eclipse. It messed everything up. So it's not IT, it's solar eclipse, right? Causing problems.
Going. Yeah.
thought she caused the solar eclipse.
Yep, getting close. All right, works. There we go. All right, excellent. So, an intersection that really does not get a lot of traffic today, per se, but Automobile Place, it had a point at some point in the previous, but again, removing that slip lane, reconfiguring the pathway, crossing location, really just kind of standardizing this. Has got one of those interesting T intersections, layered right movements that were done many years ago. Taking that out, standardizing it, reducing that crossing, just setting this up for something in the future, access at that location.
And like you said, for the future, which was my question, because the town owns a property there and that accommodate whatever future uses there might.
Absolutely. So looking at Main Street at Hospital Center Boulevard, this is an interesting intersection at this location. You have a heavy movement that's cutting onto North Main Street. You've got some very diminished sight lines at this location. One of the things I'd recommend here, and this can be done with just signs, is to establish an all-way stop at this location. Once you get comfortable driving that, you'll see how efficient those are. It takes away the guesswork for people who are turning from the side street, and you have a lot of people turning from the side street here. So narrowing this down a little bit, it does open back up as you come back down around, but setting this up so that it's a single lane approach on all sides, that pulsing of traffic with an all-way stop really makes a difference. You don't need a left turn lane, still accommodate that, but then setting this up to provide for crossing locations for pedestrians and bicyclists that are on our shared paths, and then cleaning the vegetation back so that the sight lines are opened up. And they started doing some of that already. It'll make a big difference in operations. You can see here is our just a typical section of what that may look like, with 11-foot travel lanes, and then a generous median. Wish we had that in a lot of places, and then of course that dedicated 10-foot pathway there on the side adjacent to North.
Thank you. Back up one slide. I hope it doesn't mess things up again.
Do it.
So if I'm on North Main Street, it says remove right-hand turn from Main Street on Hospital Center Boulevard. So you can't turn right to go over to, is that Beach City?
No, you can still do the right. There's a lane there today.
Oh, it's
so
the
we've taken the
lane. Okay. I read it as right.
Yep.
Okay,
You can still
gotcha.
turn right.
Ah, good. Okay. Thank you.
While you're still there, just development, we've got property on Main Street that we're looking at, so there could be increased movements here. Not suggesting a roundabout here because of right of way.
No, you have the right of way to do that. In this case, because of the polarity of the movements that are occurring there, the all-way stop actually performs just as good as a roundabout. Still allows us to, this would be something we could do relatively quickly.
I'd also ask, from an ambulance's standpoint, if they've got to make a turn, is it better to make a sharp turn or a slow curvy turn, right?
Sure, good point. The radius is our setup. It did run auto turn. The all-way stop will actually help that from that standpoint as well.
That median is just minimal. You're gonna pull out, stop, and then take left-hand turn. It's not ideal.
That was one of the first things I noted, and I didn't point that out, was that you've got some really crazy pavement markings out there today where it's not big enough for a car to stack, but yet you got stop bars there that say, I've got to stop. And under South Carolina state law, it actually transfers the liability to the person or the community because the stop bar is there because you've told them to stop. If they get into an accident, you're liable for that. what you're seeing is actually the median the all-way stop takes away the need to stop in the middle of that. What's happening today, and that's what's causing the weirdness of drivers entering that.
You don't think anybody would get caught halfway across like they do now?
You don't have to at this point because you're gonna have the right of way to go.
Go all the way across. We also looked at the possibility of a roundabout there.
Preliminarily talked about a roundabout at this location. It would be given the size of the area, you could actually do more of a neighborhood circle if you wanted to test that out, which wouldn't be a full-blown roundabout, but would still give you the center circulation. You can fit it in there. Given the right-of-way that's there, you would need some on the north side.
Wellens Hospital Center Boulevard. All over that. Wellens Hospital Center Boulevard. Wait a minute. Just a minute.
Brian was actually being nice and asked if council needed a break while we are having a sidebar.
I'm not sure. I think Hospital Center Boulevard, Jim, I think we own it up to a certain point. Yeah,
Then it would go to the hospital.
I can verify it with you all and send an email. So I know that what we just saw, 2 hours of going through this, it's a lot of information, but for the next steps, Brian, if you can advance to the next slide. We'd really like to hear your feedback and direction on the interim improvements that Jim talked about for segment 3. And we'd also like to hear your feedback and direction for the two segments, segment 3 and segment 2 in Main Street. You have the full corridor plan in front of you that you can review over the next, like I said, 60 to 90 days. I think we are anticipating this coming back to council for adoption in August. And then as we go through the other segments, we'd have additional workshops as we needed. And then as we receive your guidance for segment 3 and segment 2, we would reach out and get additional stakeholder feedback from Hilton Head Plantation, school district, whoever we needed to for that. So I know Sean's given me some questions to ask. I don't know if you just want to open it up for general comments, or I can just ask these to guide those.
It might be helpful. We have folks here to make comments, I think.
Well, let's go ahead and do the appearance by citizens first. That way, it may spur it gives you time to take a break. So Kim, do we have folks that signed up to speak today for appearance by citizens? We don't? Any citizens wish to speak today? Yes, sir.
I'm going before Frank. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members, Mr. Orlando, town staff, and our friends from Tool. I made a bunch of notes. My comments specifically are about the Main Street area. I'm disregarding these notes because what I heard today was very encouraging. I've lived on this island for 14 years. I was a first-time property owner in 1980 on Hilton Head. Love this island, love what this council does for this island, and love living in this community. I biked 1,000 miles in the month of March. 700 of them were on this little island where you are restricted from entering gated communities. We all have friends that allow us into those gated communities. The words jungle were used. I live on the Indigo Run side, and part of Indigo Run. Try to get across William Hilton Parkway into Hilton Head Plantation to meet your cycling buddies when you're going in that gate. It's going through a jungle. Much of what I saw today addresses my concerns. I'm on the board of the Boys and Girls Club for 13 years. Our kids want to ride bikes. They want to be in safe areas.
that whole concept of the circle at Woburn is a great idea. I like option 3 for Main Street. I like cycling in the street. I think it's a safe area. I don't like cycling with pedestrians walking. And I would also tell you this, that as a board member of the Kicking Asphalt Bike Club, ex-president Councilman Alford was president of our bike club for a while. We have 235 members. A lot of them live in Hilton Head Plantation. Once they come out of there, where in the hell are they going? They're going onto Main Street, and it is a disaster. I want to get some bread and milk and ride my bike and go to Harris Teeter. It's a crisis waiting to happen. It's a casualty waiting to happen. So what I saw today, I say to you, thank you. There are great options that I think will address these issues that I'm concerned about and all cyclists from Hilton Head. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Public comment. Any other public comment? Ms. Tunner.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide some feedback, and I wanted to focus on Main Street. I am not a hardcore bicyclist like the individuals in here, and I'm just going to provide a different point of view. I don't feel safe riding my bike on the street with a bike lane, and the reason is there's no protection between you and the cars, and people are so distracted today, whether they're looking at their phone or they're trying to deal with their Apple CarPlay that's not working right, that they can take their eye off the ball. And that street is a very busy street. And so just from my personal perspective, and if I had children, I've got grandchildren, my children are grown, I wouldn't feel comfortable with them being on the street either. I would much prefer them to be on a pathway. And that's what I participated in as we visited here, was the bicycling on the pathways and not on the road. So just to provide a different perspective. And the other thing that I noticed is the beautiful canopy of trees on Main Street. I mean, it is gorgeous. And they overhang, and I'm just a little concerned about how many trees we're going to have to take out to build out this plan, because it is really beautiful and unique. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Oh, Frank? Okay. No. You were slow to raise your hand, so I didn't think you were going to speak with us today.
Well, I'm Frank Rabel, and I'd like to just say a magnificent job, you folks, you consultants, and the staff, period. You did a wonderful job for over a year looking at a problem from a clean slate, putting together solutions, and coming up with something that's really absolutely first rate. So I'm not going to stand up here and nitpick anything. I'm just saying you're doing a great job. What we have to think about is, do we want to be platinum? If I ever saw a step that's the necessary step to be platinum, this is it. That area at section 3, whatever it is, we've looked at that for years. It is terrible. We've killed people, not we have, but people have been killed there. We've seen that. We've been there. As a council, we actually went there years ago. Remember that? And so we finally have a solution. And I encourage you to move forward and put your thumbs up and say, let's go and let's get that done. Because they've got a template for us to work with in a lot of other places that are going to work elsewhere without reinventing the wheel like we used to have to do all the time. The second thing is Main Street. I think they've done a great job. And, they've accomplished a lot of things. We want to do something. We want to make Main Street a Main Street. We want it to be a safe route to school for kids. Why do they have sidewalks in main streets, against the law to ride bikes on? There's a reason, because we want to get people to walk and experience a Main Street. We want kids to walk to school, start exercising, get going. Bike lanes, go to any city. How many thousands of miles have been bike laned? They don't have any pathways. They have bike lanes. That's what people do now. We want to get kids to school. We've talked to the education department of the Beaufort County. They want to start when they build this new high school. They want to put in some pathways to get people into the school area, okay? And it'll all work out. So I just encourage you to move forward with this stuff. They've done a great job, a magnificent job. You should be proud of them. I am. I've been involved in it. We've been involved in it. They've listened to us. They've reflected it, and you've done a great job. Thank you for what you've done. It's a step to platinum, and we got to make some decisions and get on with it, folks, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last call, any other public comment? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Charlie Quigg, and I want to specifically address the section of William Hilton Parkway and the intersection with Gardner Drive and Beach City Road, which is, we didn't talk about it specifically today, but it's in the section of the corridor that we're talking about. So this is a letter to the editor that my wife wrote to the Island Packet, and it was published about 3 weeks ago in the Island Packet. And I just want to read this letter to you. Make Intersections Safer is the title. We live a short distance from the library and enjoy walking there. Crossing William Hilton Parkway from the library to Gardner Drive has become very dangerous due to left-turning cars that do not stop for people who are lawfully using the crosswalk and the traffic/pedestrian walk signals to cross. Recently, while waiting for the walk signal, my husband almost, it was me by the way, almost was hit by a driver of the third car that was going through the intersection who decided to go around him rather than stopping and yielding as the law requires. The driver was going so fast that the car went off the road. I was behind my husband and still had to cross. Drivers continued to cross through and around me instead of stopping. I observed a total of 8 to 10 cars that were crossing in front of me. And to top it off, we had the indignity of another driver honking at us, though we were, as if we were wrong, and that they were, when they were clearly not following the law. We cannot change people's reckless, careless, and lawless behavior, but we can change traffic patterns. That's what we're talking about here. Changes to the intersection crossing to make it similar to the intersection with Wilborn and Jarvis Creek, which we did talk about, so that drivers cannot turn left while the walk signal is illuminated for the crosswalk. How many more pedestrians need to be injured or die on our idyllic island at the hands of lawless drivers? And again, it was authored by my wife, Stephanie Quigg. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad you're here to read that to us. Any other public comment? Oh, come on up.
Good evening. I'm Louise Miller Cohen, and I told myself I was here to learn, to see what this workshop was going to be about today, and to hear the result of the study that was being done. So I am leaving this meeting very pleased this evening, and I like the idea of Main Street. I went down Main Street a few times and hit the pothole, and I was mad. Because I'm saying, this should not be happening on Hilton Head. But just to look at the streets, that is going to be a great improvement. It is a blessing. And also to see the cars taking their regular path, and then you have the greenery and the sidewalk over there. That shows there's going to be some protection for people who have to walk. So my hats are off to y'all. I think you did a great job. And with this, I think we should go ahead, and I stand here happy because no black land is going to be taken to get this done. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, one last call. Any other public comment? Okay, Seeing none? Brian, why don't you go through the questions that we have, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Sure. So I'll start with William Hilton Parkway Segment 3, which again, that's the North Ridge, well, Beach City Road to Dillon Road section. And we talked about the interim improvements that Jim has applied for with SCDOT. So, Kim, I don't know if you're able to pull up the presentation again, but that's where it showed some proposed either signalized intersections or roundabouts through that area, or maybe even a hybrid of the two. Jonathan did a really good job of explaining the pros and cons of each. '46, 45. So I'd like to start there and just get your feedback. You know, we also talked about reduction of speed limit in that area. We talked about Jim working on the RRFBs, the appropriate lighting along the pathways, maybe in the plantings, the end pavement puck lighting at the crosswalks. So maybe we start there and just get your feedback, and then we'll move on to the.
I'm going to ask a simple question. Who thinks we need to do it? Who thinks we need to continue with this proposal? I'm just trying to get a kind of a yay, nay.
I'm confused now. Are we talking about the interim improvements?
Yes.
And then second, we'll talk about this. So interim improvements,
This is the, well,
yeah, it's a different one.
yeah.
Yes, we can start with the interim improvements and then go to the. Yeah, why don't we start there?
Yeah, we pretty much did, but I think you've got the head nods.
Got them twice now.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's, I mean, I
There you go.
see,
So,
Go ahead. No, I didn't see your light on. I apologize. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Nope.
I guess what I'm looking for here is that we're not going to be asked again. Because before I even thought about being elected, I sat out here with elected officials saying we have a problem. So that's the comfort level that I'm looking for today, is that not being asked again. Next step is us going out there celebrating it.
I can give you some confidence that I don't want to come back and ask you again. Jim has full direction to push forward, right? There's some preliminary work, there's some study work, and then there's a full encroachment permit to submit. There's a lot of work. It's on my desk. It's up 3/4 of an inch thick. We are moving forward along. We were anticipating at least a majority of you thinking that was a good idea, and if we had to scale back on what we asked for, great. But it doesn't sound like we're scaling back on anything. And Jim, full speed ahead.
Tammy?
I wanted to just say that, yes, I support moving full speed ahead with regard to that area. And also, it's been my observations as traveling up and down to 78 as I do, people will take advantage of any opportunity to cut through anywhere they can. As we're trying to eliminate that risk, full planting, perhaps with boards, is truly important. I just wanted to emphasize.
I can't vote now, but I nod my head and I give a thumbs up. This is a great presentation. Thank you to our true experts over here for analyzing what's happened, giving us reasonable solutions. Sideline, I like traffic circles.
I think we've got our direction on this one. I think we're all in agreement that the work that Jim's done needs to continue to move forward.
Perfect. Go to 45. So then the next talk would be just the options 1 and 2 for this area. Do we want to look at some proposed signals in this area or the roundabouts? I believe, like Jonathan said, and I've said it earlier, if the goal is safety for all, and maybe it takes a change in thinking and something dramatic. If the goal is to move traffic, then maybe we stay with the status quo. But something's got to give if we're going to increase the safety for the pedestrians and bicyclists in this area. So, happy to lead that.
Council thoughts?
Is there any difference in the cost? More costly roundabouts or?
In this case, roundabouts are going to be slightly more expensive. It's going to be the finish and fit of everything, but just to give you context on what a signalized intersection is running right now, just to signalize it, that's the hardware. With mast arms, you're looking at about $500,000 to $600,000. That's about double what it was just about 2 years ago. They're increasing. They're getting to the point where they're close, not equal to the cost of a roundabout in certain cases.
I think
I'm sorry.
one other thing to consider is the resiliency of a roundabout during storms and major events. So.
Other comments?
One other quick question or comments. The adaptive traffic signal system, does it make any difference if we add 2 more signals in this stretch?
We would just add it to that system.
Instinct is that a traffic circle will be a stronger statement for the community brand, but I haven't heard enough information that it'll work in this particular area, or what are the complications and so on. So, I mean, I like the idea of slowing traffic in this area. I think it's an additive element in that area. I'm just not convinced yet that from an engineering standpoint that it's optimal.
Becker.
So I understand and hear you about the additional safety aspect of doing the signalized crossings. I just tend to agree with Mr. Ames on this. In terms of island brand and aesthetics, the roundabout, and I don't know, maybe there's an offset, you can tell me, of slowing the traffic down so significantly, having them paying more attention to the movement, that there's safety that we can rely on. Definitely prefer the roundabouts.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? So,
Sorry.
yeah, it's Alex. Wait a minute.
You talked about, I guess, a hybrid where one might be a traffic signal and one might be a roundabout. Which one would that be?
We would end up looking at the system again and come back with a recommendation on what that would be, because there is an operational performance analysis we would need to run with that. We've run all of that with roundabouts. I can share that with you, Councilman. I'd like to see that. That shows the performance of that. We can also add in the hybrid scenario so you can see where that would be. With the signals, it comes down to more of a spacing, because you have to have enough distance in between existing signals than you do with roundabouts. So thinking through that logical pacing and then overlaying on top of that the pedestrian aspect would be something we would want to work on together collectively here, and then come back with a recommendation of what that would look like.
Is there, without pulling up the heat map, was there one of these intersections that had more incidents of accidents or fatalities?
There is, specifically around where the Oaks is in Northbridge. That's the hot zone through there. So controlling that in a manner that works the best would be one of the priorities there.
And assuming that you had the right amount of distance if you added a signal and a roundabout in the other location. I like the blend if it works.
Alex?
Yeah, I'll start with great job with sort of balancing of volume and access to the business community in this to include the residential. I also want us to be mindful that Sea Turtle and Northridge at this point are not as functionable as they probably can be in the future. Port Royal Plaza, once an anchor is set there, you will start to see even more activity. I'm struggling a little bit. I appreciate the roundabout aesthetic, sort of it being a part of our signature. Just can't get out of my mind what happens at Sea Pine Circle because of all of the resident and commercial activity that happens there. With these so close together, I'm struggling with that internally to get to the point of saying that may be a viable option. So I guess for me, I'm more inclined with signalization and us really paying attention to the access points and the crossings, because that's what's going to make this place work, okay? I mean, times we've done sort of movement improvements and businesses have closed because of it, right? I'd like to see the exact opposite here, all right? Didn't have as many fatalities in this area when folks are walking to Big Star to get a loaf of bread versus across the street to Donald Jenner, right? So, to me, that's the more important piece.
Other comments? Alfred?
Looking at the comparison, pros and cons as stated there persuade me roundabouts would be preferable.
All you got? Yeah, okay.
I can go another 10, 15 minutes.
That's all right, you're done. You're done. My comment is, I stated a preference to roundabouts, but I'm going to yield to the experts about what's the best way to configure these intersections.
Okay, so I've got some concerns. We're in the process now of analyzing our traffic flow from off island all the way down to Sea Pine Circle. This is another major project. How does it impact the flow from here to the Sea Pine Circle? How does it impact the flow from across island to this area and vice versa? So we've got HomeSense getting ready to open up. We've got Aldi coming in. So we've got two new anchors plus whatever's going into Sam's Club, which will be in the next year or so. How does it all tie into that growth? And I appreciate the circle and the brand element, and I love it. But I agree with Mr. Brown. I don't have enough. I agree with several actually. That I need some more information to try to determine what is the best avenue, and whether that's working with the Lockmuller to create that travel pattern flow, or if y'all can do it yourselves. I need to understand that. I don't want to see a delay in moving this forward. So I think we all feel that the urgency to do something, but it is a major change, and we just have to have a deeper understanding as to what it means for that whole area. So that's all I got on that for right now.
Helpful to us. You've all, and whether it's a roundabout or a signal, I think our next steps are all the notes that we're taking to refine this concept before we go outward, right, to get some real stakeholder input. I think our stakeholder input on Main Street is Hilton Head Plantation. It's the shopkeepers, the business owners. There's also stakeholders on our whole island that drive through William Hilton Parkway segment 2 and 3. So, Mayor, I'm going to compare some side notes with you on what real stakeholder input looks like, because sometimes the stakeholder input isn't what the professionals and experts are telling us that needs to be safer. With that being said, I think we have enough from you today to refine these segments, do a little more work. We heard a lot about Main Street as well, and come back to you.
So for this section, this is just saying, hey, this is the design we would like to go, right? And then there's the funding side. Realistically, how much time are we looking at before something could happen here?
We're all looking at each other right now because I don't know. I'm
Exactly.
gonna
Well,
guess. We are months in the making of just the preliminary encroachment permit information. That's months in the making, not a couple months.
So we're looking at Main Street, $10 million. This, we're looking at 6 million?
Yeah, you're looking at least $6 million for this, probably closer to 10.
Right, well, that's where I'm going with this is how our decision affects when it's gonna happen. And, you know, this is a major island event, right? And that communal input, what is it? How is it done so that it's true input? And I'm not saying I'm suggesting this, I'm not saying that at all, but, you know, a referendum type situation where the community speaks to say this is what we're for or against. This is major, and there's going to be a very decisive feel on this. I just want to make certain that we're doing it right.
In terms of the reasons that we are at this crossroads of making a decision, section has a lot to do with everything that was just described to us in terms of how it's not well designed. It creates a safety concern. Well, I always want to hear from the residents on all important things. This is a safety issue that we really do have to address. So I don't want to put it to a thumbs up or thumbs down. We have to address the safety issues. We have to do it without risking what our island is all about. And I think there's a dramatic difference between what you'll visualize and the impact that you'll have from the traffic signalizations repeatedly up and down 278, which takes away from one of the goals that we've had, which is to create more of a parkway feel, create that sense of place that you're all within something special. And the roundabouts, to me, will at least give us that opportunity to not only maintain that, but build on it, remove the safety issues that we need to, must address. So funding is clearly important. How we go about it quickly to make sure that we are moving at rapid speed.
That's exactly my point, right? Is at what time would we potentially would have funding in place to move something forward and make certain that we're vetting it and understanding it correctly? You know, here's the great thing. You know, these roads were never designed for today's travel. So we're addressing the 80s, right? We're addressing the past for the future. And we've got it, well, in future livelihood. So I just want to make certain that we have maybe a better understanding of where the money might come from, what funding sources we would look at. You know, there is a referendum coming up in November, thank you, and who knows if it's going to pass or fail, but, you know, what money would be there or not there. What money is there potentially? What could DOT bring in? I think that we just need to see some of that so that we make the right decisions in that timing of coordinates.
Mayor, Alex raised his finger first.
I just had some additional thoughts based on your comments, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate bringing forth the fact that we are working off of old material, trying to go into a future place. Automobile Place, that road, for those of you that don't know, used to be the end of Beach City Road. Now it's a piece of pavement that nobody's using. As far as the funding is concerned, I'm just going to throw out the idea, sort of get to work on discussions around the TIF district, which we sort of control our own destiny versus waiting on others to help us out in an area that we know we have issues and we need to improve.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to bring forth, you know, we've talked a lot today about how we can improve the corridor, but when we go back to the original purpose and questions, sort of touched on transit, but we just touching it. We have to be very mindful that we are at a point where we need to start to think about changing the one person per car attitude on Hilton Head. I think that piece elevated. If we don't, it will sort of be in the same situation that we're in now, 20 years from now, where we're saying, well, why didn't somebody think about eliminating automobile place versus just leaving it there, right? So I think, you know, this council has taken the leadership role in saying, hey, we've got an issue, we need to do something about it, but I think we need to get out of our box as well to make sure that we're proposing things downstream that make sense for the load that is already here, which in a lot of cases we can't handle because we don't have enough parking spaces. There's not enough room for bikes and pedestrians. So the more we can get cars off the road, I think the better we'll be.
Brought up over time, and I heard it joke about it in today a little bit. Who owns what roads, and what does that mean to us in terms of what we can do? And I still think there's value, at least in having some information gathered and provided to us, and what it would cost to own, if not all the roads, certain pieces, segments of the road around the island. That makes our job as to address issues that we have as easy as it seems it might be over on Main Street. We can reduce sides of widths of roads, et cetera, when we own them. But I would really love to know what that might look like for us in the future for addressing all of these traffic and road issues. And I agree with the idea of picking up the discussion on the TIF in this area for funding. I also, Alex and I have been having conversations around transportation. That's a piece of what I've been trying to talk about for years now. And it really does need to become part of our conversation, not just a comment along the way. Conversation, we need to start looking at what our options are and how that might help in the long run. I am concerned about what might happen in the future if the bridge were to be opened and expanded. Those will have direct impacts on all the things that I worry about with regard to how do we maintain the word was civilized, and I think that we need to look carefully at that, so that that is our highest priority of maintaining civil rights atmosphere that we've created that represents what
Mr. Alford.
I would hope that when you come back with additional information. The question I'm curious about is what segments can be done by themselves without impacting or requiring us to do all Parkway. Can we do
Right now, the answer is yes, absolutely. We can do 3 before 2, and we can do Main Street before another segment. One segment. So what we're planning on doing is digesting this book, because this book, to me, this book makes sense in the regard that it really sets the table for these various, call them streetscape segments that we're asking you to digest and give feedback on. We probably have 8 or 9 different segments. We can't afford them all. I think we can afford 2 or 3 of them, especially if we realize that some are in a potential TIF district. I don't want to get out in front of you. I have some thoughts on how we can fund some of them. We have the funding for the initial encroachment permit work, right? That's going to make an incredible difference and set the table for future work. That's important. We intend to come back to you one or two segments at a time over the next several months. Our next segment we're going to look at, obviously, is what else is really important out there. It's that stretch through the Chaplin neighborhood where you have folks crossing in and around Chaplin Park and around some blind curves. That's our next segment. Some improvements are going to cost more than others. We haven't started pricing this out yet in a true opinion of probable cost, but we will. I will say I'm confident that we don't have the funds right now, but I know that it's going to take a stack of dollars from DOT, maybe grants, and just like I do, but perhaps with Beaufort County, right? Beaufort County was just a good partner in the fact that because we asked, right? They didn't just show up and ring the doorbell. We asked, and they provided $3.1 million for the adaptive traffic signals. We couldn't have afforded that by ourselves without them. So let me think through that. What's helping us is this: your opinion and position on the streetscape itself. The sooner we start stacking those up, the sooner we can start finding money. I don't know what to go look for yet because I don't know your position. Got it.
Thank you, sir. I think it's helpful for us to look back at this larger book on the prioritization, 64 through 65 pages. And I understand which one is coming up next, but, looking at the score sheet was helpful to me to see the high-ranking areas. And I agree that for the area that could be included in a TIF district, that's, say, easier to finance is not really a good description, but compared to what? My husband's always asking me, compared to what? So compared to other options, it's easier. So I support that idea as well. And for me, any kind of improvements that are geared strictly towards public safety are my priority one. And then lastly, with regard to stakeholder input, I appreciate a top of your head idea of a referendum, but I think these questions are a little too complex for that, and I think the town manager and his staff can come back to us with some ideas about how to set out a plan for stakeholder input, how to manage those questions, not manage, but how to prepare the questions to receive input. I don't want to try to ask the questions myself, but, what are the key questions that we need to be asking to get good stakeholder input?
David?
Appreciate that. Staff and consultants, incredible job. Well laid out, well articulated. I have two comments that relate more to council and staff than consultant presentation. Just a thought, because of the traffic crisis that we had last week, I wonder whether or not Orleans Road, Arrow Road, sort of that area around Seapine Circle ought to be included in the Palmetto segment, because clearly we had a situation where everything was at a stop, and included New Orleans and so on and so forth. So that's just a suggestion. Also, I may be imagining something, but I think there's potential tension among us as council and maybe council with staff, because there's a conflict between accommodating the ever-increasing people on the island, our quote-unquote traditional aesthetics, streetscape, signage, lighting, and of course the environment. And I use the word traditional because what is traditional for me might not be what is traditional for someone else. I've been here a while, so traditional for me goes back to the 70s. Somebody who's bought property today, traditional is pretty much non-existent except what they've heard about Hilton Head in the past. So I am. We have a template for things that we're heading towards, But when we use the term tree lawn extensively, and grass becomes an accepted form of vegetation, all the plans, I get concerned. Ambiance of Hilton Head isn't manicured landscape. And so there may be appropriate places to have the lawn for aesthetic reasons, and there may be other places that are not. And then secondly, there may be places lawn won't grow, so you better be having an alternative. So lighting, we know that lighting is a political hotball in the community, and so that's why I go back to what I said before. We better be prepared to say how we are going to utilize lighting and in what locations. Signage will get to the environment issue of how much paving are we going to put down, so on and so forth. So I have this concern inside of me that these are templates that are going to be interpreted down the road in ways that I might not agree with. And I just want 7 members of council to be sort of on board that is a way of looking at Hilton Head that may or may not be.
David, I love that comment, and what it made me think of in terms of traditional is that maybe it's not only my experience, but I think you may have had this as well. When you run into people who are new to the island, who have been here for a while, maybe not since as long as you have, the common theme that brings them back to thinking about how the island is designed, what it means, it all refers back to those original concepts that you were a part of. And so whether you've been here for a short time or any length of time since the beginning, I think those original concepts are what's at the heart of everyone's thoughts when they think of what does Hilton Head mean? And what should it be maintained as? So yes, over the years, things have changed and everyone comes in at a different point. But that core value remains, and that is a huge testament to the work that you and all of those who worked with you and Charles Frazier brought to this island. So for that, thank you.
All right, any other comment?
Let me just say one thing. We had a somewhat similar conversation, Bethany. Alex added a comment about being relevant, and that's where the tension is. There may be a different way of looking at the island today. You have to recognize, and so I don't have the answers, but I'm very clear on what the core values were 50 years ago, but I don't know if those core values are subscribed by everybody who's running a business or so on. There's tension there, and I just think we have to be aware of it.
So if I might real quick, just ask, because I think this conversation could go on for a long time. Do you have enough information at this point for us to move forward on to the next item? You want us to say intersection?
I have enough. I have enough. And David hits on a great point, because it's not jumping out of the book. We're not trying to reinvent. We're trying to respect the landscape pattern and the fabric, but we know that some lighting and striping and some intersection improvements need to happen, because it's just different. We're nervous too. Our tension isn't because we don't know what David's talking about. Our tension is figuring it out and not becoming Anywhere USA.
What this may say is that there are people in the community who have to be given a heads up in the direction we're headed. Lighting, why?
Not on that subject, but a quick technical question about next steps. Back to Mr. Brown's question, are we going to be asked again about the interim improvements? First of all, a thank you to the county. I'm looking at the staff report for the Public Facilities and Safety Committee of the County Council that approved an intergovernmental agreement between the county and Hilton Head for William Hilton Parkway safety and pedestrian improvements area we're talking about, in the amount of $600,000. But my technical question is, if an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, is required, then we ought to put that on our agenda as soon as possible.
We'll address that. One last thing, and I'll be quiet. I cannot leave the room without thanking the folks that really didn't say a lot today. Darren Wright, he doesn't even need a last name anymore, but Darren is still on staff. But we have Jordan, Darren, Carla, Jim, Teresa. They are an incredible transportation team. And at any given moment, they're on call around the clock at night and weekends to make sure the signals are working. And I just want to really say a big thank you to that.
Can we second that, Mark? Because we work with these folks every day. Wonderful, wonderful people.
I will move on to segment 2.
No, we're not done. That's why I was trying to move it on.
I'll explain to Brian later what just happened.
He really wanted to know if we wanted bike lanes on Main Street, yes or no? That would be a good question.
That's the one unknown. It's the bike lanes off or on, and we don't have to decide the second because we're coming back to you, but some
Yeah.
direction helps.
Comments?
Eric, can I say something about the bike lanes? The option that includes bike lanes is the one I support because, you know, we also have multi-use pathways. It does not mean you can't ride your bike on the multi-use pathways, but we need to be able to expand our opportunities for those who choose to not bike on the multi-use pathways for various reasons, and I respect that. And I appreciate the folks who came to comment on that today. I think we need to recognize that we have what we call an active cyclist community, and some of those who also are working and prefer not to be on the multi-use pathway. And I think that I support including the bike lanes. And I don't think I do. I know I do.
I do also, but the scale of the cross-section is what concerns me. Option number 3 makes me more comfortable that we're going to retain the tree canopy that's so important to Main Street. Yes, we're going to have sidewalks right along the side of the road, but in a slow speed situation with narrow lanes, I think that's plenty safe. And so I'm leaning in the direction of bike lanes in the road and sidewalks, that cross section that fits into 50-50.
Tammy?
So my concern about the bike paths on the road remain. I think that it aesthetically doesn't look as good. I think there are, as was pointed out, safety concerns, potential for safety concerns with the bike lane there. I do hear everyone else as well, and as a compromise, option 3 would certainly, if it's in the scope, as David pointed out, and so I would be willing to go along with that with no further comment on that piece of it. I do have a question though. E-bikes. Well, how does e-bikes fit into all of this? Will they be out on that that bike path as well? And will they then be raising the, how are you going to control that? I see it. I see there'll be an answer from the, from, pardon me? They'll have a place to go. On the bike path, on the bike path. On the bike lanes. So they'll likely. No, I understand, and that's why I'm asking the question. Do you think it's likely that they'll increase since they're on the bike path? What does that mean? it's just a thought. I don't really need an answer to it. I just wanted to point out that e-bikes should always be considered and thought through how it's going to work. That's all.
Mr. Alfred?
I would be in favor of bike lanes in the street, and in addition to bike pathways on the side. That is the safest approach. Slow cyclers have the option to ride on sidewalk lane, and fast bike riders have the option to ride in the street. So conflict between bikers and pedestrians. On bike riding on Main Street for years, cars, riding in the street than I would on a pathway. I would.
Okay. Mr. Brown, comments?
Thinking about buying me a bike. See how fast I can ride.
I got a couple you can borrow.
No, I'm yielding to the experts on this. It seems to me the option is, what I like to always describe as compromise. You're getting this away from vehicles. I think they negotiate with pedestrians a lot better than the faster riders, which will now be in the street. So I'm good with this.
So, unbeknownst to anybody in this room, I used to be an avid bike rider in Charleston when I was in college. So try riding your bike in Charleston. You're really fighting with the cars. The reality is that whether there's a lane there or not, the bikers are going to be on it, period. What's going to happen? So why not be prepared for it, address it? The education piece of it is that those bike lanes are for street bikes, not for your daily ride. So, again, I leave it up to the experts to kind of direct that, but option 3, I'm comfortable with. While I'm mentioning education, and it was brought up earlier, where is education in all of this? Because we've got different state laws in South Carolina when it comes to pedestrians and cars that just creates a difference of knowledge. What you're used to in one place, you're not going to have the same thing here. So, as we're talking about all of this, signalization is different in other states as well. So it's got to be clear cut and concise as to what we might mean by whatever signalization processes, tools we use. I saw some up there, I didn't know what they meant. So we got to make certain that it is black and white. But the education piece, has got to be a big part of this, and how we utilize the knowledge to our chamber, to our resort guests, to our bike companies, to everybody. Because I went out today, drove around, and not one biker looked either way at a stop sign. That begs the question as to what are we going to do to stop it? Is it a ripple in the road to keep them from going across? Is it a 3 or 4 pole system that makes them get off their bike and slow down? Because we're talking about safety. We've got to talk about the effects of the bikers and the pedestrians not looking both ways. So I just bring that to y'all's attention, not looking for a response on that, but just something to consider.
Just briefly on education, and Frank can give us more of a lecture on it, so I'll try to make it shorter than that. And that is for bike-friendly communities. The League of American Bicyclists looks for education. He had been failing in that, and the Bike Walk Board has been working on that. Fire department is excellent in helping out with education of kids. The chamber, we've been working with them to try to get videos on their website. The bike rental companies, we've been trying to work with them to get out more information on, what's the education, what are the proper protocols, and what are the safety rules, et cetera. So we could still use improvement in anything that those three groups, the chamber, the town, including the town's fire department and Bike Walk can work together to do that, I think is a great thing to do. I know from, a lot of us do whitewater rafting and you have to watch a safety film. You have to go through a safety course. I've tried to encourage the bike rental companies to require something similar. The problem is most of those rentals are done online and folks rent them online and they're dumped off at where they're staying. And they never see anybody other than maybe if they see them dump the bike or, or bring it to them or take it away. But if there was some sort of video that could be as part of that rental agreement, so you watch the video, yes, people may or may not, but at least we've tried to do that. So anyhow, I think there's some improvement, but there are some efforts being made.
Let me be clear. I didn't mean to insinuate that there's nothing being done. So Frank, I want you to understand that. I know y'all are trying hard and I appreciate that, but I just wanted to make that statement for our consultants.
And I didn't mean that. I was trying to be informative.
No, not at all. Yeah, just want to be clear on that. Any other comments? Ryan, you got more questions?
No, I think we're good.
Well, with that said, guys, really a great job. Y'all have provided a document that we can really work off of, and it really is just so packed full of information, right? And it gives us options and things to look at that I don't think we've really had in the past. So you know what, this is the kind of things that we look forward to, and because we can make good decisions off of this. So thank y'all. Any other last comments? No?
I just want to say thank you.
All right, we are adjourned.